What secrets can you spill now that an NDA has finally expired? I worked for Equifax 20-something years ago. We were doing things with your data that we were not supposed to do. I know this is going to come as a great shock to a lot of people. I worked for a company that did screen printing and engraving, and one of their biggest clients was the US military. They bought everything from China. They had a person who'd cut out the Made in China tags and replaced them with Made in the USA tags. My grandma worked for a shirt factory in the 1950s and always swore that they'd finish out the last few shirts of the large orders by sewing new labels into whatever they had available. Need 3 more mediums? Here, take the small tags out of these 3 and sew in mediums. If you're ever with an elderly loved one and they get a Medicare call, hang up. Just hang up right away. I've worked at a company in downtown Chicago this last year, and they were absolute slimeballs. All of these young agents scamming old people, promising something about this new upgrade to their insurance, when they're really just taking them off their plan. A lot of these people had Alzheimer's, and we'd get POAs calling in saying that we took their mother or father or aunt off a plan and now they can't get back on their plan for an entire year. I finally quit because it was so horrific what we had to do to our elders to get a paycheck. I personally tried to do everything I could to not be slimy, but at the end of the day the whole job was effed. I took a man off his plan and I was going to have him start a new one the following month. He didn't have his medication list on him, so told me he'd email it to me. He finally emails me a list of at least 20 medications. One of these, that was covered for like $20 on his plan, would literally go up thousands of dollars on the plan I put him on. I called him back and spent 2 hours cancelling what we'd signed him up for. I still feel horrible to this day. Imagine if he forgot to send me that list of medication. Listen to me. As a past Medicare advisor, do not let your parents or grandparents take these calls. Medicare Advantage plans are effed. And Medicare advisors are 20-something-year-olds who'll do anything to get them taken off their plan. In the 90s, my friend in the garment industry told me that to be considered made in China, 50% of the labor cost had to be incurred here. At the time, that was the cost of sewing in a label that said Made in Canada. The takeaway here should not be that all local brands are scams, it's that when we're able we should do our research, buy secondhand, and buy full-price stuff that's genuinely made start to finish in one nearby country when we're able. Even if you walk away with nothing on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you still get money for doing the show in the first place. I'd say the other positive thing is how much all of the producers pushed that they really wanted us to win, and really wanted someone to get the million. They weren't out to screw contestants. Actually, they gave us training with past contestant appearances of how not to screw up your chances. I worked for a company that audited medical bills and looked for stuff that wasn't charged. If you weren't billed for something, they'd try to collect on it and get a share of that. If you were billed for something and shouldn't have been, well, sucks to be you, moving on, no refunds. When I worked for state IT, we weren't supposed to provide details of what hardware was being used or operating systems. In the 90s, I took on an old server, souped it up, put Linux on it to run our networks. This was pretty radical at the time because everyone else was using something proprietary like NetWare, and I was able to deliver services for free, like email and Samba, that they were paying out the nose for. The NDA wasn't about security, it was about keeping how much money they were wasting under wraps. Never open a document with DocuSign on your phone. We took every piece of data we could get our hands on. Well, frick! My company has been pushing for us using DocuSign for our clients ever since the pandemic started as a way to help clients be more flexible. This is, upsetting, to say the least. During my geology PhD, I visited the site of a proposed waste disposal site. A preliminary geophysical survey identified a strange anomaly, a deep linear feature trending to the south-southwest. It looked like a buried river valley. The site needed investigating for an environmental impact statement and report, part of the planning application. My access to the site and investigation included an NDA. I couldn't publish anything about it until after the rubbish dump was built and a 5-year stay was put on my thesis. Access was restricted to only a few people. My PhD supervisor also thought that the anomaly was an ancient buried river valley, perhaps a few million years old. This is exactly what the people who wanted to build the rubbish dump wanted to hear, as they absolutely couldn't put a rubbish dump over or near a karst feature, like dissolved limestone. Contamination could leak into the groundwater that way. We drilled into the center of the anomaly in 2003. We encountered peat and gravels, then 40 meters of clay and lake sediments, then some more gravels, but then we found 65 meters of hard clay. In fact, 2 layers of clay, 40 meters of orange clay and 25 meters of white clay. We hit limestone bedrock at 128.32 meters deep, 33 meters below sea level. The hard clays were left behind after the limestone dissolved. It was cast, a type of cast called a pocket deposit. They were also found in the UK. The clays were used to make pipes, pipe clay, and cheap pottery. They were about 15 million years old, judging by the fossil pollen and leaves they found. By the time the stay on my thesis ended, the rubbish dump was built close to the anomaly, where it shouldn't have been. Marketing companies will hire junior people, give them amazing-sounding titles, and then charge the client outstanding fees per position, and pay those people junior pay, pocketing everything else as profit. The time they charge on estimates is double what it actually takes. I mean, that's just cold consulting. In my last job, I was billed out for $175 per hour and paid $35. I jumped ship for a not consulting job recently, and I haven't looked back. Best part is no frickin' weekly timesheets to track every 15 minutes of work I've done. When a pharmacy's stock of medication expires, they can't just throw it away. So they hire pharmaceutical waste disposal companies to take it away and dispose of it properly. The pharmacy I worked for bought expired medication and supplies under the table from one of these disposal companies and resold them at full price. The good news, they were busted and folded pretty quickly under the weight of having to operate like an honest pharmacy. The company in question is no more. Part of Amazon's associate training is literally how to lie when asked certain questions, and there was a social part of the contract that discouraged speaking poorly about Amazon with friends and on social media. I don't think there are many companies you can work at, speak ill of publicly, and not get fired if found out. No NDAs needed to cover that. Big financial houses in New York City knew about the impending crash at least 6 months before it started in 2007. I was at an investment conference when I heard the heavy hitters discussing it before going out on stage. I'll never forget the sentence, "What do we do? Go out there and tell them we're all screwed?" They then proceeded to go out there and peddle their "everything is great" bullcrap. I'd never heard the word tranche before that day. I worked for Lloyds TSB. It's an FTSE 100 UK bank in the mid-noughties. I remember chatting to our area manager a few months before the crash started. I said I was concerned about the rising level of unsustainable debt I could see building up, and I felt things were coming to a head. He told me not to buy shares in Northern Rock, which was another FTSE 100 UK bank, because he'd just been to a conference and the word on the grapevine was that they were screwed and they knew it. A few months later, Northern Rock collapsed exactly as this guy said it would. It was a massive national shock because nobody saw it coming, but they obviously did because it had been talked about for months in inner circles. Fast forward a few more months and Halifax, another huge UK bank, was teetering on the edge of collapse. The UK government stepped in and persuaded Lloyds TSB to bail it out. See, I still worked for Lloyds and was at a small work conference where our executive management did a little presentation on the impending acquisition. They told us they weren't allowed to look at the books before the purchase, so they didn't know how bad the balance sheet was, but they were still going ahead with it. There was an audible gasp from the audience because we knew it was a horrifically dangerous situation. The UK government blocked them from knowing how bad the situation was, but still made them buy it. Lo and behold, it turned out to be far worse than anyone expected, and the UK government had to bail out the now vast combined Lloyds and Halifax as it was drowning in its newly inherited bad debt. A total crap show. So maybe it wasn't quite as much of an unexpected disaster to the majority as the movie The Big Short makes it out to be. God damn, the fact that governments were wrecking themselves to protect who? A bunch of rich CEOs? Still makes me furious. I was working at a hospital as an intern. There was a woman who had a brain tumor a while ago. She got in for a checkup, 6 months pregnant and having depression. The doctor thought he found a new tumor, so she had another brain operation. But there was no tumor, and they cut her head open for nothing. And after she woke up, they didn't tell her this. Instead, they acted like they removed it successfully. Basically, all donations go to operating costs. If someone wants to donate to a non-profit as an FYI, you can designate what you want the funds to go to, because otherwise, most individual giving goes straight to operating costs versus direct assistance, because programmatic money is provided by grants from government or foundations. But also, for the everyday reader, operating costs are a fancy way of saying building rent, employees, and benefits. For example, your friendly neighborhood social worker with a huge caseload that's helping connecting folks to services. And all the stuff that the government contracts and foundations generally don't want to pay for. Non-profit budgeting is nuts. Not quite an NDA, but a contract of non-competition, and we had to sign that we wouldn't discuss the recipes with other restaurants. That being said, mayonnaise. So much gosh darn mayonnaise. Even in other kitchens I've worked with, the amount of mayonnaise is unholy. All of the success the business I worked for had actually come from books taken out of the house of a deceased dementia patient that the owner cared for in the 90s. The owner just executed the plan, and the books are still on property in a safe, hidden in a wall behind the owner's husband's weapon safe in the building only accessible by the janitors and family. Also, the delivery guy is next in line for the business, not the daughters. Corporate Green Herb is a greenwashing Walmart-modeled business that pays awfully and treats its employees like a never-ending replaceable resource. The turnover rate in the Mary J industry is astronomical. Yeah, from a friend of mine. Went from grower to grower like 5 times in a couple of years. His bosses were all frat bros and took Green Herb constantly. Most of them had lavish cars and suits, watches, etc., paid the lower employees crap. Pretty much the standard Instagram influencer, and by lower employees I mean everyone but the few higher-ups. He built and maintained irrigation systems and was treated like he was disposable. As soon as he finished building the systems, of course. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I did data entry for a lifestyle seminar company. Names, email, home addresses, credit card numbers, all being handled by underpaid, over-caffeinated college students. You do the math. I worked in the auto industry for a respected and highly ranked luxury brand. As a manager, we learned from corporate to teach the employees how to solicit a positive review, or more importantly, how to dissuade a negative review. We were using tactics that are beyond immoral and borderline illegal. A personal favorite was having to meet with a disgruntled customer, personally accept all the blame for whatever shortcoming, real or imagined, and tell them that the negative review will only affect the low-level employee that was in their corner the whole time. Then offer them some freebies and excuse myself so the other employee could apologize. 99% of the time, the customer would take the employee's side and leave them a positive review. Occasionally, they called corporate to complain about me, which did absolutely nothing. They wanted those negative phone calls as long as the actual online mailed review was positive. Additionally, we'd call people in for a free oil change, tire rotation, free floor mats, etc., and replace parts that were suspected in auto acceleration faults. They were trying to fix as many cars as possible to avoid a recall and bad publicity. In that case, it still became a big news story. The SUVs with a known defective engine that broke just outside warranty did not become a news story. Seeing people brag about their amazing car based on ratings still makes me cringe to this day. If you use the ratings and reviews of vehicles to select a brand of car, don't. Most of them are skewed and exploited by certain manufacturers. This probably isn't going to surprise anyone, but I've worked and still do in advertising. I'm still limited to how much I can reveal, and I won't be naming any names. But around the early 2010s, we were developing technology focusing on hyperlocalization. We already had access to a plethora of devices because we had personally developed mobile apps for some very big and household name companies. We also had our SDK in millions of devices via other apps. We tested out our tech in Vegas on the Strip. We wanted to see if we could easily communicate with the devices without raising any alarms for the user or the app developer, assuming we didn't want to share the tech with them. We were able to do so with ease as we tested by sending them push notifications. As you can tell, none of this involved permissions from anyone involved. Our goal was to localize customers to the portion of the aisle that they were in. So if they're in aisle 7 of Ralph's, we know that the middle of the aisle is selling cereal, so we'll immediately send a notification on some cereal sale. We find this very creepy right now because the average customer has become wary of being monitored, but of course to us or any advertiser, the user is just a number. Nobody is ever actually interested in finding your deep dark secrets. Before they could go much further in this tech, I left the company for a better opportunity. I don't know what they're doing now, but they're still in business and they've expanded. I was one of only a handful of people briefly considered for the male voice of Apple iPhone's Siri. The baby bunnies who don't get adopted are fed to the python. I work in finance. I knew about the Nintendo theme park at Universal Studios before it was announced. I also got to see a lot of the animatronics get created. My favorite was the piranha plant. The computer doesn't tell me your rates. Your rates are determined by my mood that day and whether or not you complimented my shirt. I think a lot of us know this one at least. Anyone who's actually really negotiated on their first mortgage and shopped around a bit can probably attest to how flexible it can be. Chase Bank Mortgage Division uses outdated technology it bought for hundreds of millions of dollars from Quicken and Rocket Mortgage. It's a DOS-based system that Quicken created around 20 years ago. They also purposely handicap their salespeople who work off commissions. To avoid paying out larger commissions if they're doing well, they'll be pulled into receiving worse leads or put on special assignments that limit productivity. In worst-case scenarios, when a salesperson finds a way to break the system and make more money than Chase planned to pay out, they dig through the employees' chats or personal files to find some reason to terminate them. Chase also promotes internally to inflate their number of higher-level positions held by minorities. Sounds great on the surface, but they do so artificially. Typically, positions are filled by recruiting HR. But whenever they want to bump the numbers, they open a position that only inclusion candidates can apply for. Inclusion candidates are code for non-white or disabled. These positions are usually for low-level management who they can cut in the near future. Oh, and they give blatant preferential treatment to employees with children to avoid lawsuits. They lost a big one a few years back over fathers getting equal maternity leave time. Most green herb growers, like some of the biggest companies in the world, mix their strains together regardless of policy or SOP, because people are stupid and upper management doesn't give a crap. Stems, seeds, they don't give a flying F about what makes it to the end of the line. They only care about money, not product. That's a you problem as the consumer. A new company took over a contract I'd worked on and sent everyone an email on Monday morning saying we had until Friday to accept a 20% pay cut, or Friday would be our last day. I was a team lead. I'd been part of the committee that hired every person on my team. My team asked if I was staying. I told them it was a big pay cut and I understood if they left, and I'd be happy to write them a letter of recommendation. They all stayed. I was under an NDA that precluded me from telling them that there were about 5 of us out of the 50 that all kept our previous pay rate. They obviously assumed that I was taking a pay cut with them by staying. I'm pretty sure my NDA wouldn't hold up in court, but I didn't know that at the time. I felt sleazy as frick to treat my guys that way. Reality shows are fake and staged with actors. Maybe it's not obvious to most, but some people still believe that they're real. I auditioned for one a few years back. Electronic Arts is a horrible company that treats contracted workers like slaves and forces them into a cutthroat environment where yellow badges, contractors, are promised blue badges, which is full employment, based on quality of work. But blue badges run teams of yellow badges and take credit for the whole team's work. I worked as a QA tester on The Sims 4, and I can't tell you the amount of times that I was told not to submit a report, only to see the same issue I'd found submitted by my team lead as the source. I made $8.50 an hour and worked Monday to Saturday, while team leads worked Monday to Friday, made double, and were offered health benefits, retirement, and paid time off. Bullcrap system, and I'm glad I got fired for a bullcrap made-up reason. The girl who sat next to me filed the claim that I, quote, creeped her out, despite the fact that I never said more than good morning and see you tomorrow to her. Like I said, cutthroat environment. Last I heard, she was made a team lead shortly after I left. That the State Department of IT has no idea what they're doing, and the state systems are so vulnerable that it's ridiculous. In the Capitol building, servers, old desktops, were literally on the floor of the basement of the building on old paint cans because the basement regularly flooded. My God. I worked on The Walking Dead during college. I saw a ton of main and side characters die in my few seasons that I worked on. They made us sign NDAs every day we worked on set. Big companies that have life insurance as a benefit of employment is a total racket. What they'll do, for example, is tell you that they have a $10K policy for you should you pass. What they don't tell you is it's actually more, and if you were to die, they'd just keep the extra amount of dollars more than the $10K they told you about. This might be more well-known nowadays than before, but I just try to get out this info as much as possible. I boxed up the first batch of Nokia Lumia smartphones. They were delivered in a blacked-out van with a convoy. All of the work our company did was supervised by armed guards. I was part of the crew that sent out letters to BP stockholders when the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico happened. The pages were printed with a very interesting method that imprinted the text onto the page, but left the rest of the toner semi-bonded. So the page came out completely blank off the printer, straight into an envelope with a special label that was printed out similarly. They were collected by a different blacked-out van. I saw all the specs and diagrams 2010 for the 2014 release of the Land Rover Discover and Range Rover Sport, including detailed engine breakdowns. I still have the book somewhere, as well as like 5 or 6 4GB USB brackets that were packaged with them. I can't remember the name of the gallery, but there was a fun set of prints that only 100 or so were sold. The one that sticks with me was a lady lying undressed with what looked like bolognese on her, topped with a raw egg. The print set sold for like £10,000 a pop, and I had a set just chilling in a box. Something like 3,000 sets were printed and only the best ones went out. Working for a printing company was pretty good sometimes. That video game that was terrible on release? It was terrible in beta and alpha, and we weren't allowed to warn you. Used to work for a spare parts manufacturing company, we were instructed to call the competitors from untraceable phones, faking as customers, to know their prices and specifications and then obviously never follow up. Not a flood forecaster, but I did weather stuff for government and saw the potential for a massive flood that the flood forecasters were completely ignoring. My supervisor called them into a meeting, we showed them the data, and they were so clueless that they didn't even know which watershed would potentially be affected. I literally had to make a custom map that explained it in black and white. Once reality dawned on them, they got real quiet, left the room. A major flood forecast was issued something like 2 days later. Ended up costing the taxpayers over $500 million, made worse because they weren't prepared. A flood review was later done, my help was never acknowledged, they blamed bad data and a lack of staff for not being prepared. They got a crapload of money and staff and never talked to me again. I didn't have an NDA, I'm just never supposed to discuss it, but screw that. I worked for a publicly traded company in the late 2000s. They had one PC running Windows 95 and Access 97. That was a very important database. Without it, the company couldn't run its monthly and quarterly accounting procedures. The head of IT didn't know how to upgrade the database. That company's long gone.
Patients of Reddit. What happened when a doctor or nurse accused you of faking it when you were actually in need of urgent medical care? My friend's dad went to the ER and the doctor said he was fine after minimal examination. Her dad insisted something was wrong and said he wouldn't leave until they ran some tests. As he was being escorted out by security, he had a brain aneurysm and died. Her family was awarded a pretty massive malpractice settlement, but they were absolutely devastated. I fell down a flight of stairs one time while working, hit a nail on the way down and ripped my forearm open and was bleeding a good bit. Adrenaline had me going long enough for my girlfriend, a nurse at another hospital, to drive me there. I had a bloody paper towel on my arm and all the security guards and nurses assumed I was a junkie that blew a vein. Finally, all the hype wore off and I kinda passed out and woke up in a wheelchair in the exam room. I don't know exactly what happened, but my girlfriend was flipping out on the workers. She said half of them assumed I was on drugs and the other half thought I was faking it to skip the line. I wasn't dying of blood loss or anything. I just got woozy when I actually was able to see the meat in my arm for the first time. They all just watched me as I fell to the floor and busted my head on the floor. Even then, they didn't do anything. My girlfriend, who's not even half my size as I'm not a small guy at all, had to pick me up and drag me into the wheelchair. Screw that hospital. Not as a patient, but as a parent of a patient. My wife and I started to suspect that something was wrong with our son starting at age 2. He would run around all day and was an active little guy but never sweat. He also never appeared to get cold. We live in New England and he would often take his shirt off before going to sleep even in the winter months. These concerns were dismissed as a toddlers are weird sort of thing by his doctor. We later noticed that he would stop and complain about his hands or feet hurting while playing or laying in bed. These were also dismissed. We were told that the pain in his feet could be because his feet are flat or because of growing pains. We were told that it could also be attention related. The doctor said that it's not uncommon for middle children to act out. This continued for 4 years. My sister is a biologist and asked us if we ever got him checked for Fabry disease. I flat out asked the doctor if he could be tested and the doctor told us that there was no way this was Fabry and they weren't going to test a kid without any genetic history of the disorder. The disorder is genetic, and without a classic sign. One that often doesn't show up until adulthood, if it shows up at all. We waited until our son was literally screaming in bed about how his hands and feet feeling like they were on fire. We demanded to get him tested and he was diagnosed with Fabry. It's essentially a metabolic disorder caused by a missing enzyme. There are many issues associated with it, but the main one is extreme neuropathic pain in the hands and feet. The pain can be random, but with my son, it is normally because he overheated since he lacks the ability to sweat. He plays sports, so we have to be careful. Overactivity and fevers have to be watched out for since his body can't cool itself down. Pain can last anywhere from a couple of minutes to a couple of days. The average age of this diagnosis for this disorder is around 16, so it's not surprising that his doctor missed it. Most doctors do since it's a rare disorder. That was a little over a year ago and my son is doing well now. There is no cure, but treatment allows him to live a relatively normal life with some added pain. I couldn't imagine making him wait until his teens to get any relief. I was in labor, and because it was my first, they acted like I had no idea what was happening and kept denying what I was insisting. I was over 2 months early and handled pain so well, they acted like it was just in my head. Made me stand at the counter filling out paperwork while I insisted I needed to push. They decided to lay me down to check if I had even started dilating, and I promptly pushed them out. I was furious with how I was treated. I still am. My mother had a stroke at age 32. The doctors didn't diagnose it properly for over 24 hours because they were convinced her symptoms must have been related to drugs since she was in good health and so young. My dad apparently tried to tell them that she has no history of drug use, but they didn't believe him. Now, she's permanently disabled because of how long it took for her to receive proper treatment. Not me, but my best friend nearly died of a kidney infection that her doctor brushed off as period cramps. Not me, but my mother. She had called an ambulance because she had been experiencing chest pains, to which they basically told her she was crazy. About a month later, she passed away from a heart attack. When I was in labor, the hospital had my records wrong and showed I was due a month later. I was ticked, especially since I was in labor and in a lot of pain. The lady kept arguing until she realized I was in labor. She must have heard all the crap my boyfriend, now husband, were talking about her. Happened to my mom. They told her she was having an anxiety attack. She was having a heart attack. Was 12 years old and had a heart problem that was just starting to show. Arrhythmia and palpitations. Only happened when overexerting myself. Go to cardiologist and was accused of faking it to get out of chores and soccer practice. By the time I'm 15, my heart is absolutely unreliable throughout the day. During an attack, I would lose my sight and pass out. Sane cardiologists still claimed I was faking it. Kids just don't have heart conditions. 16 years old and my heart finally stops. Luckily, I passed out earlier at school and was in the nurse's office when my heart stopped after another episode. Woke up in the hospital and, by the way, had a heart deformation that required surgery. My mother blew her lid, according to my doctor, of wanting to see me dead. Went to his office and threw his degrees and awards office wall at him and was screaming at him. Only reason she didn't sue was to prevent assault charges. Simple echocardiograph showed growth causing the electricity to pump my heart to go into circles. Wasn't fun having heart attack simulations nearly every day for 4 years. Before anyone asks, was poor and that cardiologist was the only one on my mother's insurance. To my doctor's credit, we both kind of had a laugh at this before the test results came back. I went to my primary because I had been experiencing hot flashes. Dr. Google couldn't tell me what was wrong, and I knew it didn't feel right. Well, at least we know it wasn't menopause, my doctor joked. I laughed. What 23-year-old woman spontaneously goes through menopause? This one. My doctor was very apologetic. I'm on hormone therapy now and doing fine. Luckily didn't end up with any crazy negative side effects, but could have if my doctor didn't run a full workup just to be safe. Changing it up just a little, my colleagues were convinced a girl was just faking a stomachache. She was about 16 years old and it was exam season, a time when we would get many sudden tummy aches, fits, etc., so I understood their skepticism, but something didn't sit right with me. I took her history myself and sent her for an emergency ultrasound of her abdomen, ectopic pregnancy. I was ready to rupture at any moment, so I shipped her over to OBS/GYN to get surgery ASAP. She came out just fine, but man oh man did I give my coworkers a hard time after that. Exam season or not, we need to be thorough. Had another time when it was just me and one other doctor working admission. She dismissed a case of a little girl faking fatigue for attention. Thankfully, I overheard her telling someone, so I went to double check. The poor girl was having a carpopedal spasm and was most definitely not faking her condition. Hooked her up to some calcium and sent her home with meds the next day. I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm perfect, but in our line of work, we must always be a little paranoid. I wouldn't really say they didn't believe that I was in pain, but didn't believe how much pain I was in. In February 2016, I started getting side cramps. I went to the ER, they said I had a tiny ovarian cyst. Okay, cool. I've had those before. In March 2016, I started my period and it continued until June. Between March and May, I went to at least 7 doctor's offices and ERs. I've had several ultrasounds and always had about 5 to 6 cysts spread between both of my ovaries. I was told I was too young. You're only 23, we don't want to take the cysts out because it could damage your ovaries, or you could lose one or both if something goes wrong, and what if you want to have kids one day? And on one instance, it's a Saturday and we don't feel like calling a surgeon in. I was calling off work or leaving early at least once a week. I always had a portable heating pad on and taking pretty heavy pain pills. In May 2016, I finally found a doctor who would do exploratory surgery on me. He pretty much opened me up, went, "Holy crap," and closed me back up. I then had to have a major surgery a couple weeks later because my left ovary had eaten the cysts and was attaching itself to my colon and an artery in my leg. So I ended up losing my ovary anyway. I did throw a see you later ovulator party before my big surgery, which was a big hit. I'm trying to think of an after-while crocodile pun with the body part, but I'm drawing a blank. Any YouTube comments want to take a shot at it? Not my child, my brother. He was 11 and suddenly tired and lethargic. He missed a lot of school. He hated missing school. My mom kept taking him in, and they'd say it's the flu or puberty or mono, and it wouldn't ever get better. After a few weeks of this, my mom brought him to the hospital again and yelled at his doctors that something was seriously wrong with their son and they needed to do their jobs and figure out what it was. It was leukemia. They called the next morning just before 2 a.m. and said the test came back, your son needs to come in now. Not in the morning, right now. I can't imagine what happens to a parent in that moment when you know it's bad because they call you in at 2 a.m., but you don't know why. He was in treatment for just over a year and was re-diagnosed on his birthday. A few months later, he had a bone marrow transplant and was able to come home pretty quickly. There were complications from the transplant called graft versus host disease, like organ rejection, but the new cells try to reject you. It attacked his musculoskeletal system, causing stiffness in some dangerous situations. This October will be 8 years since the transplant, and he's cancer-free. That boy loves to use the cancer card now, but he's definitely earned the right. A doctor didn't believe me when I had a kidney stone that was too big to pass. He only changed his mind when another doctor checked me and started freaking out since I was getting super sick from the stuck stone. The doctor ended up getting fired from the hospital and my parents sued him. I wouldn't call it urgent medical care, but I was stuck in my room for about 5 hours on my bed with my head pressed into my shoulder because I had pinched a nerve. I had never had one before. I wasn't able to move my head at all, and when my mom got home from work, she called an ambulance for me. They carried me out in a sitting position and off to the hospital we went. When we got there, it took about a half hour for me to get into the hospital bed and ended up just giving up and leaving me sitting upright. The doctor pulled my mom out of the room and asked if I had a history of faking injuries in order to get painkillers, because I was pressing against the pain instead of leaning my head away from it. I had bronchitis, which turned into pneumonia, and when I went to the nurse, she sent me back to class because my fever was only 99. By the end of school, I made it home on the bus, but I had to go to the emergency room because I couldn't breathe. My lungs were filled with fluid. I was in 4th grade. I was out of school for 2 weeks, I think. When I was 16, I was in a really dark place, and one day I decided to confide to my doctor that I thought I might be depressed and see what he would recommend. Dude straight up laughed in my face and said, "You're not depressed, you're just a teenager." I told my mom I wanted to change doctors after that, and it took another year and tons of self-destructive behavior before I sought help again. Urgent a condition as the others, but it still manages to raise my blood pressure years later. Starting from when I was about 7, I would have terrible stomach pains, which my pediatrician claimed was attention-seeking behavior. He told my parents that they should punish me anytime I complained of stomach problems. My parents, who love yelling, jumped at a new reason to scream at me on a nearly daily basis. When I went to college, I was finally diagnosed as having a hiatal hernia, just like my grandparents, father, and aunt. When I was a kid, they even commented that I had the same symptoms they did, which for my pediatrician meant that I was just mimicking their complaints and didn't have the same condition. Because it had been untreated for so long, I now have to worry about Barrett's and esophageal cancer. Lucky me. New hearing doctor didn't believe that I needed hypoallergenic molds made and ended up making regular ones to try them out. Within a few days, my left ear was sore. It hurt a lot more than usual. Doctor and ear specialist thought it was just a little bit of irritation and that it would clear up quickly. It ended up being a major middle inner ear infection. Ruptured the eardrum, pus and blood everywhere on my pillow. About a month of agony, a lot of drugs, and a lot of specialists in the hospital. I was already very hard of hearing. That made me lose another 10 decibels permanently. This isn't so much a faking it situation, but more of my ex-girlfriend having to deal with a really incompetent security guard that hindered her getting medical help. My ex had a severe peanut allergy, and one time she ate a Thai chicken pizza in the college cafeteria that did not list peanuts as one of the ingredients. After her throat started burning, she knew something was wrong, so she grabbed a glass of milk, which I guess helped a bit, and went outside for some air because she was having trouble breathing. A security guard was passing outside in front of the building and saw that she might need some help. At this point, my ex was panicking and frantically looking through her bag for her EpiPen. The security guard asked what was wrong, and she tried to explain that she had a severe peanut allergy and needed to be taken to the hospital. When the security guard saw her take out the EpiPen, she took it from her and said that it was school policy that she be the one to do it. She then asked her to hold out her arm so she could inject her. My girlfriend could not believe that the security guard was trying to inject her arm like it was a flu shot, and out of frustration, she yanked it from the guard's hand and put it in her thigh, like you were supposed to, and sternly told her, "I need to get to a hospital now." When I was 9, I would get stomach aches when I went to school. My doctor insisted I was faking, but my mom insisted he take it seriously. Finally, they gave me a barium x-ray and saw I had a stomach ulcer. I had to take Malox and drink milk at every meal and snack. I even had to get special permission to get milk from the cafeteria at morning recess. My teacher ridiculed me for that. She was horrible and abusive. While I never received any of her physical abuse, there were 2 other boys in my class who got it on a regular basis. This would have been 1980, so it wasn't normal for teachers to be pulling hair or knocking a kid's face into a desk. Every day, the 3 of us would have to stay after school while she told us all how stupid we were. My stomach aches did not get better, and the doctor accused me of some combination of faking/exaggerating/non-compliance. We literally had to save all the empty Malox bottles to prove I was really taking my daily doses. Today we know that having me drink milk 6-7 times a day was exacerbating things, and in retrospect, my mom never really understood how stressful it was being in that class. It wasn't until the last few months of 4th grade when they finally transferred me to another classroom that I got well again. Later, my mom told me that even she thought I'd been exaggerating when I talked about how mean the teacher was. Because I left the honors class and moved down a level, my former teacher still ridiculed me pretty frequently when we crossed paths, but it didn't tie my stomach up in knots. I'm just going to read this comment here because I agree with it completely. What a vile excuse for a human being. I can't believe individuals like this get to have any authority over young children. So sorry that happened to you. Not me, but my mother. She had been very sick and tired. Imagine a cold, but it's 100 times worse. The doctor she saw multiple times kept basically blowing it off, saying she just needed some rest. It kept getting worse. One day, I was home with her. She was in bed sleeping and I was out in the living room watching TV. For some reason, she decided to walk out into the living room and sit in the chair across from the couch. She looked like a legit zombie, and when she sat down, she could barely hold her head up. I immediately called 911. Turned out she had pneumonia, and one of her lungs was entirely full of fluid, while the other was more than halfway. She spent a few days in the hospital and fully recovered. I don't know what made her decide to walk into the living room, but if she hadn't, then she would likely have died that day. All of that could have been avoided if the doctor she saw would have just paid closer attention to what was going on. I can barely remember this, but I was around the age of 11. I went for a sore throat, severe cough that would make me dry heave, phlegm, just the whole thing. Doctor says it's all in my head, despite me having an obviously inflamed throat and a very wet cough. I remember sitting there with my grandma who was like, I don't think it was in her head. I went back the same week and was diagnosed with walking pneumonia. I think that's when we switched doctors too. Not a doctor or nurse, but a bunch of camp counselors and the infirmary doc. I went to a sleepaway camp for children with cancer or anything chronic and or life-threatening. It's the second day and I wake up feeling a little bit sick with a sore throat. Okay, I'll just drink some water and I'll be okay. It's the summer after all. I can't get sick. Breakfast rolls around at 10 a.m. and I'm not hungry and my throat is getting worse. I tell one of my counselors that I'm not feeling good and he says, eat something, wait till after the morning activity. I couldn't bring myself to swallow, so I just sat there and then went to arts and crafts. I feel so sick at this point, I just sit in the corner of the arts and crafts room, literally fading in and out. I tell a different counselor and he says, drink some water. I do, it doesn't help at all. I realize that they're not going to do anything unless I make a big deal about it. I think to stand up and make an announcement. When I stand up, I immediately need to sit down again, and now my throat hurts too much to talk. I say, I don't feel good in my raspy, weak voice. He says, wait until after this activity. Lunch comes around at 12:30 and I go to the bathroom before sitting down and I look like a zombie in the bathroom mirror. I go back to my table and I say I can't eat. The counselors ask me why. I say, I feel sick. One of the counselors begrudgingly agrees to take me to the infirmary, which was a mini hospital because all the kids here had medical issues. I can barely walk, but I make it there, and promptly get sat down on an old wood bench and left alone as my counselor walks back to eat lunch. After about 15 minutes of waiting, a doctor pokes her head out of her office and asks me what's wrong. I tell her, I felt sick since I woke up, my throat hurts. She feels my forehead and says, you don't feel warm, but I'll get a thermometer. She comes back with a thermometer and puts it under my tongue. I had a fever of 102 and strep throat at a tightly packed dining hall surrounded by kids with compromised immune systems. I'm surprised I didn't get anyone sick, but the fact that it took 5 hours to get a chronically sick kid some freaking medical attention still makes my blood boil. I was bedridden for 3 days and missed literally everything I wanted to do while there. The worst part was, this was my last year before I got too old. I was losing my hair, my gums bled randomly, my skin looked like garbage, my muscles cramped up randomly, I literally fell over once while standing on my feet, I got horribly depressed, world felt like cardboard is the only way I can think to describe it, and all I wanted to do was eat and sleep. Sometimes I would start talking in conversation and get a word jumble midway through where words didn't come out right, which was the beginning of some social anxiety for me. I went to several doctors who plainly thought I was full of it. Several of them asked me how much I drank, and one of them asked me over and over again as if he didn't believe me when I said I didn't. I was tested for low thyroid, cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, and some other scary things, but nothing came up. This was over a 6-month period. I finally figured it out by Googling my symptoms, which led me to a message board that suggested I find a doctor who would give me a blood test for it so I would know for sure. Turns out I was really low on B12, somewhere in the low 300s I think. They went from nearly eye-rolling me to my face to giving me a B12 shot in the office before I left on my second visit and prescribing sublingual B12 to me. I actually found out a few years later that I have a gene mutation that keeps me from methylating B vitamins. I mention it to every new doctor I see now, and they always look at me like I'm a hypochondriac, then look it up on their laptop and kind of go, okay, like they're relieved I'm not full of crap. Not exactly accused of faking it, more so just disbelieved or taken lightly. I went into emergency at the hospital because it was Saturday for a medium-level abdominal pain that had been ongoing since the previous weekend. I'd been to the general practitioner on Wednesday or Thursday and had a blood test booked for the coming Tuesday, early as possible. However, my mom decided to take me in because of how long it lasted without change. At the hospital, I had a blood test taken and the doctor thought 50 milligrams of codeine would take care of my non-problem. It did nothing, so he gave another one and Panadol. He ended up believing it would work, but it sent everyone frantic when I ended up bent over, frothing at the mouth and coughing up blood. The blood test said pancreatitis. My brother had severe asthma, as in I'd wake up in the middle of the night to paramedics and an ambulance and only ask which grandparents I was going to wake up at. He had an asthma attack in school and his second grade teacher declared that he was faking it. Another teacher, Mrs. B, who was also friends with my mom, told her that he had a very well-documented history. Several medical journal articles written about him by this point with more to follow as he got older. He was definitely having an asthma attack and needed his inhaler and possibly several breathing treatments now. We kept several different inhalers at the school, but they had to be given by the nurse. The second grade teacher once again declared she knew what an asthma attack looked like and he was faking it. Mrs. B, the friend teacher, took him out of class immediately, tried the inhalers, and called our mom. He ended up staying in the hospital for several weeks and wasn't well enough to go to school for months. The school district not only had to pay for tutors to come to our house to help him keep up with classes, but also had to pay for his medical costs since mom was also a teacher. The second grade teacher tried to get Mrs. B in trouble for removing a student from her classroom without permission and almost got fired herself for causing the situation to get as bad as it did. Mom also was granted a transfer to our elementary school, which she had been trying to get for a while to help make sure my brother's health was okay, and she helped create an amazing, successful reading program there. The school district also implemented some changes that allowed kids with rescue inhalers to be able to keep them with them instead of with the nurse, as long as certain procedures were followed. The second grade teacher, on my brother's first day back to school, declared in a loud voice, "The next time, let me know if you need your inhalers." The overprotective big sister in me took over and loudly shouted back, "He did!" The school secretary gleefully told my mom it was the first time she had ever heard me talk above a whisper.
Police officers of Reddit, what was your "they could have gotten away with it if they had kept their mouth shut" moment? I had a car pass me once where a passenger hangs the upper half of his body out of the passenger side window with his middle finger in the air while screaming, "Muck the police!" He had my attention for the seatbelt violation. I got behind the car and ran the registration. Registration is suspended. Registered owner's driver's license is attached to the registration and his license is suspended. Registered owner also has 2 warrants for retail theft. I stopped the car and they both started with the free speech thing and how I can't stop them for giving me the fingers, which is 100% correct. When I pointed out that I can, however, stop them for the passenger not wearing a seatbelt and for the registration violation, suddenly they both got quiet. Driver got arrested for suspended license and his warrants, and the passenger got himself a citation. The driver's vehicle got impounded. Moral of the story? Tell your passengers to shut their mouths. Had that guy not been a moron, his buddy would have been homeward bound. Not a cop, but a public defender had a client who made a long statement that didn't help her case, but the judge was letting her go without setting bail. Before leaving the courtroom, however, I was informed that the police from another precinct were coming to pick her up, and she'd be held until they did. They didn't get her until much later, but I told her to absolutely not say anything to them, to keep her mouth shut. The next day I go to do her arraignment, and I get the notice of any statements, which started with, "My lawyer told me not to say anything, but this is what happened," and admitted to a variety of crimes. It was frustrating to say the least. Not a police officer, but I do know of this house in my local village that was a notorious den of illegal substances. The police came to search that place but couldn't find anything, and as they were leaving, the lovely owner yelled at them that they should have brought the dogs. So yeah, they came back a few days later with the illegal substance sniffing dogs and found huge amounts of that hidden away. Absolute morons. When I was growing up, a cop approached my mom, who's an attorney, at our house. She closed the door behind her, and I watched the interaction inside with my doggo. Now, my mom was always very honest with me about criminal stuff. She probably wanted to scare me out of committing crimes, something that largely worked. She comes back inside a good 30 minutes later, and tells me about the stupidest dealers ever. Guy and girlfriend sell mad amount of illegal substances just down the block from my house. They are the big boy distributors of the area. It's a decent sized city, but on the smaller side, so I don't know how the heck the illegal substance scene works. And the cops have been hoping to bring these guys down. Well, the cops caught a break when they confessed to a dispatcher. Turns out they were robbed by a rival dealer and their computer was stolen. This is the early 2000s, so desktops were pretty clunky, along with all of their illegal substance. They called 911 and proceeded to tell them all of these details, somehow never realizing their stupidity. The cops swooped in, the station is literally 2 minutes away, and arrested the lot of them, and then told my mom everything. They were in our neighborhood, and my mom knows and is loved by everyone. Moral of the story? When reporting your house is being robbed, maybe leave out the part where all of your illegal substances was stolen. You know, I'm really curious how that conversation actually went down over the phone. 911, what's your emergency?
Oh, thank God. Everything's been robbed. I'm reporting a robbery.
Okay.
My new Dell computer and all my illegal substances are gone.
Oh, please go on.
The white stuff, the powder, the sugar cherries, all the wings. It's the good stuff.
Yep. We'll come pick you up in a couple minutes.
Honey, I did it. I told them everything. Oh God, I told them everything.
I was asked to help keep the peace while 2 probation officers searched a guy's house. In most jurisdictions, you have to submit to a search of your person and your home if you're on probation. During the search, a PO lifted the probationer's mattress and said monotonously, "Wow." The probationer got upset and said, "Yeah, it's freaking snowing my piece. Arrest me. I don't give a freak." Turns out the PO found a huge naughty toy, but after the guy opened his mouth, the PO lifted the mattress more and found a bunch of individually wrapped grams of snow and a weapon. The PO said that seeing the naughty toy was enough for him to ignore the mattress, but because the guy said something, he kept looking. That guy's attitude and his need to open his mouth got him 10 years in prison. Not me, but my boyfriend. Boyfriend's working overnight when a guy comes through town doing 35 miles per hour in a 25-mile area. Boyfriend pulls the guy over and asks for his documentation, license, registration, insurance. Guy flips open his glove box, snatches his documents out, and snaps the glove box closed super fast. Boyfriend laughs and says, "What do you have in there?" Guy gets a little sheepish and says,
Registration, insurance, a little bit of leaf.
Boyfriend, "What?" Guy coughs and says,
Registration, insurance, and a little bit of leaf.
Boyfriend laughs again and says, seriously? Can I see? Guy got a slap on the wrist for being honest and having a very small amount. Currently watching live PD, and the guy told the officer, "I have caffeine pills in my back pocket." Gets them out, puts them on the hood. Everyone's chill. The dude then comes clean and says it's Molly, and the officers look at each other and go, "Do we even have a test kit for that?" Other officer says, "No." Dude's face just shows he should have kept his mouth shut. I saw PD as well, ironically in my hometown, where a woman pulled off the highway unnecessarily with another car that the cop initially intended to pull over. She mentioned to the cop that she wanted to have a few words with the other vehicle because they were being rumpholes and trying to race her. This is why the cop pulled the other car over, because they were speeding. Anyways, officer tells her no and that she needs to leave, and that it would not only be unsafe, but also illegal if she got out of her vehicle like that on the side of the highway. She says, okay, whatever. Cop proceeds to speak with the other vehicle, and she is still parked there, now yelling out her window at the other vehicle. Both the cop and the people are laughing, and he still does nothing. Cop goes to write the speeding ticket, and this witch gets out of her car and approaches the other vehicle. He finally freaking cuffed her and put her in the squad car, all the while she's complaining that it's completely unfair, was completely dumbfounded. Okay, so we had a DUI accident where a guy kept driving straight into the woods into a tree because his GPS was predicting a future street. He walked back to his hotel room and left his check and papers in the car. So we go to the hotel, and go to his room and knock on the door. He did not have to answer, but he did. He was pretty clearly intoxicated. I asked him if he had anything to drink since the accident. He did not have to answer, or he could have told us that he drank after the accident. He said, "No, I haven't had anything to drink since the accident." And where I'm from, you have 24 hours to report a property damage only accident, so it wasn't even a hit and run. So, as I'm locking the guy up, he tells me he's a lawyer. I told him, "I hope you're not a defense attorney." But in his defense, he was intoxicated. I can respect that. A man who follows his GPS, his Siri, all the way to the end. Turn left.
But Siri, that's just the ocean. Are you sure that's the way to Disney World?
Yes, turn left. Do it now.
Okay, here we go.
Yes, another one. When I was in high school, I liked to park in parking spots that cars had parked poorly into just as a muck you. One time, I was at a high school football game and a Jeep had parked like crap. He was nearly halfway into the spot next to him and parked at an angle. I was driving a 98 Chevy Silverado at the time, a big old pickup truck, and I had my brother help guide me into the spot so I was perfectly in the lines. That made it so the driver door was completely impossible to get in. I took a picture for the novelty of it and went on my way. When I got back to my car, the Jeep was gone and every panel on the passenger side of my car was keyed. There was an officer nearby, so I told him about it and showed him the picture. He told me there's not a lot they could do because there were no witnesses, but he'd give it a shot. He looked up their license plate, called them, and asked them if they had done it. They confessed and ended up having to pay $1,600 in restitution along with getting a felony. My friend was pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt while he was with a few buddies, gets handed his ticket, and the guy in the back seat says, "Am I going to get a ticket too?" Officer replies, "Well, were you wearing your seatbelt?" No." "All right. Can I see your ID?" Not really the brightest fella. I don't know why, but I love how, he was excited by this. "Hey, oh, come on, man. Can I have a ticket?" "Yeah, me too. Come on, I want one. Let's all get one." "Oh, shucks. All right, kids. Everyone gets a ticket today. Hooray!" I pull over this guy for expired tabs, ask for his ID, and he's feeling around for his wallet, can't find it. He says, Man, I'm one of you. It's cool." "Oh, what department?" Actually, I'm a security guard, but same thing." I'm polite. "So, where's your ID?" "Oh, it's in the..." And he motions to the trunk. "It's in the trunk?" Actually, no. My BS radar is going off. "Okay. You want to get your ID out of the trunk?" Nah, I don't have it." He starts looking around for another story to use, but now I know I'm supposed to stay out of the trunk. He's also not giving me any more information. "No ID, then I have to take you in and get you fingerprinted." I'm going to get in that trunk one way or another. He's looking like he's lost. I ask him what's in the trunk, but he's not talking anymore. We pull him out and get him in cuffs. Another officer takes him to get ID through fingerprints. Since his car is expired past 6 months, California laws, we tow the car. In the process of getting ready to tow the car, we need to take a quick inventory. In the trunk was a police uniform with fake patches and a metal badge. No weapon, but a duty belt. He also has stacks of explicit imagery of children. This is a guy who a neighboring city had been looking for months. His MO was to dress as a police officer, talk to kids, and you can figure out the rest. If he just gave me his name, I could have looked up his ID and verified he had one. I'd probably have let him go, but the neighboring city had zero information as to his name. They only had a vague description of the car and the fact he was posing as a police officer. In fact, what he would do is start talking to a kid in the 9 to 12-year-old range, tell him he has to be taken in for questioning, and handcuff the kid and take him to his car. He was a bad dude. So this happened a few years ago. I was patrolling my buddy at night. It was almost the end of our shift. Suddenly, we get an alert that a local nearby gas station had just been robbed, unsuccessfully, and that the suspect was supposed to pass by us in a red car. Indeed, seconds later, we saw a man speeding through the road. Details on the side, we ended up catching him on a dead-end street. When my buddy was handcuffing the suspect, I asked the suspect if he had something to do with the robbery. He repeatedly said,
I've never been there. Ask the ginger lady.
Turns out the cashier that night was an old lady named Marcy, covering up for her ill daughter, who would have never been able to identify him since he was wearing a black mask during the robbery, which we never found. Marcy had ginger hair. Fortunately, the suspect was kind enough to inadvertently confess the crime. How could he know the appearance of the cashier if he had never been at the crime scene? The jury thought the same. Fellow officers stopped a car for a turn violation. Guy's wannabe illegal substance dealer, who we've seen around the bars before. We were talking with him and asked permission to search his car. He agrees. I'm bullcrapping with him about sports and weather, and the officer finds a duffel bag. So I joke and say, nothing in there that's dangerous, right? Like bombs or grenades or explosives. He nods and says, yeah, a bunch of dynamite. I'm waiting for him to laugh or smile or shrug or do something that screams it's a joke. Nothing. I say, I'm going to open the bag and look, okay? Expecting at any moment he will stop me. He doesn't. It was 8 sticks of dynamite he stole from a construction site. Separate story. If he didn't say anything, I would have ignored the bag thinking it was tools. He was getting supplies from an MC to terminate someone. Needless to say, he went to prison for a few years. Pulled a guy over because his car was looking pretty run down. Wanted to lecture him that he shouldn't be driving around at night with only half his lights working. We got out of our car, and I approached the driver window, and he looks at me and says, yeah, all right, I admit it. I smoked some leaf. Alrighty then. Wanted to give him another chance. What? We know your lights are broken. No, I smoked the leaf. Cue the eye roll. Gosh darn it, man. So we parked his car and drove him to have a blood test done. We were already done with our shift for an hour because we waited for a long time for the doc. So when we got out, I was ready to go home. He turns to me and says, I can't call anyone to pick me up or I'll get in trouble. Good Samaritan kicks in, ends up driving the guy home. He's a chill dude, obviously. I don't know what happened to him afterwards. He probably lost that internship we were talking about. Some idiots from my hometown broke into a few houses in the early 2000s. Among several stolen items was a handheld video camera. They proceeded to record themselves breaking into several more houses and posing back home with their haul. Several of the items, including said camera, ended up at pawn shops. Well, when the battery died, they didn't remove the tape. As is customary, the pawn shop found a compatible charger and watched the recordings. Copies of their fingerprints, IDs, and the video were turned into the police, and these morons went to jail. Almost everything from the videos was recovered from area pawn shops. Not a cop, but I have a buddy that is. Nothing too crazy, but he's had countless moments where he's tried to give people a break, or all they had to do was sit down and be quiet, but they end up talking themselves into jail. Recently had a dude he pulled over that was a bit over the limit for a DUI, but not too much, so he was going to let a friend pick him up instead of arresting him. Guy got to talking and basically revealed driving under the influence was something he did fairly regularly. A single mistake is one thing, but my buddy decided the best chance at getting him to stop would be learning the lesson the hard way. Not a cop. I had a roommate in college that was no friend of mine. He got in a fight at a bar and was kicked out. He tried to go back into the bar and got thrown out again, but a cop happened to be driving by the second time. The cop told him to relax or he was going to be arrested, and he told the cop to arrest him. The cop handcuffs him and puts him in the back of the cop car. Roommate then started banging on the window. Cop then recuffed him with his hands behind his back. Roommate's stupidity carried on for the next couple of months. He was supposed to go to court over the whole thing but didn't show up. Police showed up at his job, cuffed him, and brought him to court. Judge told him he would have just received a slap on the wrist, but he now had to send him to jail for a couple of days. He was scheduled to report to jail a week or two later, and he didn't show up for that either. By this time, he disappeared. I never saw the guy again. Not a cop, but a witness. During college, my friends and I would hang out outside and smoke hookah. Frequently, we would invite strangers who passed by to join, or campus police would casually chat with us as they made their rounds. So one time, a group of freshmen walked past and asked to join. After about 15 minutes, the campus police car rolls up and the freshmen get visibly nervous. We tell them to calm down. The cops are chill. As soon as the cop gets out of the car, one freshman bolts and he makes it about 20 feet before the cop tackles him. We all clap and heckle the kid. Upon searching him, the cop finds a bunch of leaf. Then he says, "You realize prior to running I had no reason to be suspicious? I just wanted to talk to my friends over there," and points at us. The cop ends up writing a ticket and sends him off. In college, after an early football game, we had a large group at my house. We were planning on partying, but there was a really good game on, so everyone was just sitting around watching the game. We were about 50-50, underage, ages 20 to 22. There were a few people who had beers, but the drinking had not started. People were flowing in steadily, and I guess the neighbors saw the amount of cars and called the cops to file a noise complaint at 7 p.m. There was a knock at the door, and someone said, "Come in." In walks a cop. I surveyed the room to realize everyone who had a beer was over 21, except one. Just as the officer was about to speak, she takes off and dives from the couch to behind the kitchen counter. The cop pauses, shakes his head, said there was a noise complaint, but he had been sitting outside for 10 minutes and hasn't heard a word. Said to enjoy the game, looks at the kitchen, shakes his head again, and walks out. Luckily, I lived in the town next door to the college, or it would have been a rough night. This situation came from a friend of mine. So we lived with 3 other guys in a 4-bedroom apartment. One day, when only one roommate was home, the police came knocking. They asked if they could come in and search for suspected illegal substance usage. Here's where I should mention the roommate who was home was kind of an oblivious shut-in who spent most of his day playing World of Warcraft or Magic the Gathering in his room. So of course he says, "Sure, come on in," having no idea what his roommates have been up to. In room 1, they find nothing, as that was the oblivious guy's room. Room 2, they find a personal bag of leaf. Room 3, they find a pipe. Roommate 3 didn't smoke, but he and roommate 2 played video games a lot, so it belonged to roommate 2. In room 4, they find a possession with intent to distribute, giant bag of leaf. Apparently just a crap load. Roommate 2 told me it was the most leaves he'd ever seen in one place, and he was angry because he always bought from someone else. Didn't know his roommate was a dealer. 3 of the 4 get arrested, only one who didn't was the guy who let them in. My friend was roommate 3, charges against him got dropped because roommate 2 fessed up to the pipe being his and got a slap on the wrist. Not sure what happened to roommate 4, they never saw him again. Former Walmart employees of Reddit, what are your horror stories? My mom was a manager at Walmart. She told me about this woman who was trying to steal a prepaid phone. When she got caught by security, she used the knife she was attempting to open the plastic packaging with to cut the security dude after cutting herself. She then went on to scream at him that she has an infectious disease and now he's going to have it for trying to stop her. I used to do field service for Walmarts in the Portland, Oregon area. The East Portland stores were especially fun. The Wood Village, Eastport Plaza, and Happy Valley stores are relatively close together, and we techs refer to them as the Gauntlet. The Eastport Plaza store was especially active, and we nicknamed that one the Thunderdome. Every visit, we would witness an arrest or something more exciting or disgusting. Last Christmas, for instance, while Frank Sinatra's version of Mistletoe and Holly was playing, a dude was totally face-planted by some cops after resisting arrest, in the process damaging the automatic doors and knocking over a display. Another time, a tech witnessed the arrest of the hottest-looking naughty worker ever on 82nd Street, being cuffed and stuffed in the parking lot. One day, I arrived at Thunderdome and noticed that I could not get the customer service desk to check in. Several workers were not allowing people to pass, and there was also a number of orange cones marking the restricted area. A quick whiff indicated what my eyes later confirmed. Crap all over the floor. The men's room is right next to the customer service area. Eventually, they had to break out the Zamboni machine to finish cleaning up. I had about 10 registers to work on there that day. They beat the hell out of their equipment in that store, and after 2 hours, I was ready to take a leak and check out. They still weren't letting anybody into the men's room. God only knows what horrors there must have been. Working there as a cashier since October, Christmas Eve rolls around and thank God I'm not scheduled to work. Cue phone call from the manager asking why I haven't come in yet that day. I'm not on the schedule? Manager. Yes, you are. I'm not coming in. I wasn't on the schedule. Next day I worked was the day after Boxing Day went and looked at the schedule, and lo and behold, someone wrote that I was supposed to work in pencil. I quit shortly thereafter. I had a coworker call me one morning, and when I answered the phone very sleepily, she just started crying and asked, "You didn't know you were scheduled, did you?" I hadn't been scheduled, but my boss changed the schedule after my previous day of work and didn't inform me. I couldn't get to work that morning because of my lack of transportation, and I had to hang up after a painful conversation with my sobbing coworker. I transferred not long after that since my boss let that happen a few more times. I shouldn't have to wake up at 5 in the morning to call my boss and see if I'm scheduled for the day simply because she changed the printed schedule constantly. See, coworkers couldn't leave until coverage arrived. If you're the only trained cashier and the next person doesn't show up and no one else on the floor is cashier trained, they want you to stay until the late person shows up. But if they'd already worked 8 hours and covered for 2 additional hours with their coverage not showing up, she was likely to be overworked and at her wit's end only to call and realize no one was coming and she'd have to do a double shift. I worked at Walmart about 13 years ago at one of the few stores left that closed overnight. It was a regular old Walmart, not at all super. I worked overnight stocking. I liked it. I only dealt with customers for a couple hours before the store closed and then just stocked the shelves. I mainly worked in the automotive department, and the nights would go by really fast. I worked with a bunch of people who were related to each other. There was a dad, Steve, his wife's sister, and a stepdaughter who worked there during the day in the jewelry department. Steve stocked the sporting goods department right next to mine. This guy was really gross. He would constantly pop over to my section and ask me if I needed help lifting stuff up onto the overstocked shelves, and he would make comments about how pretty I was and how if he was 10 years younger, he'd date me. Dude was pushing 50 and I was just a 19-year-old girl. I just laughed off his comments, say I didn't need help, and that I was perfectly happy with my boyfriend, thank you. One night, he decided to tell me how big his one-eyed monster was. He relayed a story, a total lie I'm sure, about how one day he was getting out of the shower and his stepdaughter, who was 17, saw him accidentally and exclaimed about how nice his one-eyed monster was and how she wanted to try it out. I was dumbfounded and I did not know what to say. I just said, "Oh, well, I gotta get back to work," and kind of shuffled away. A week later, he was caught doing the deed with his wife's sister in the bathroom at work. They were both fired, his wife quit, and his stepdaughter continued to work there. Mine isn't as bad as some of those here, but it was its own special kind of awful. I worked on third shift for a summer between college years. The Walmart I was in had about 1 hour's worth of music playing over the speakers all night, playing on a non-stop loop. My sleep habits were already pretty mucked from trying to adjust to third shift, but the music is what really did it. I heard that same music loop over and over again, all shift, 5 days a week. When I left the store, I would still hear it running in my head. Then I started hearing it in my dreams. Then it got so ingrained that I started just dreaming I was working my shift at Walmart. Several days a week, I would have the experience of working an entire 8-hour shift. Then just around quitting time, my alarm clock would go off, and I would wake up and go work an 8-hour shift. I quit a few weeks early at the end of the summer because I was losing my gosh darn mind. I sprained my back moving product in the back. At first I thought it was a pulled muscle, and I walked towards the pharmacy to try and buy a heating pad and some Tylenol. I made it to jewelry, barely keeping conscious from the pain. I asked my coworker to call management and let them know I had hurt myself pretty badly and needed to go to the hospital. Management told her to have me go back to the office to fill out paperwork. I blacked out twice going back and was yelled at for taking so long. I ended up being out for a month and a half for the injury and got a whopping $24 in workman's compensation because the second I got hurt, my hours were reduced to 1 hour a week. I hate Walmart. A friend of mine was working part-time at Walmart. He'd been there for over a year. He was working any and all positions, shifts that they threw at him, so he could try to provide for his wife and unexpected baby. He started to apply for any and all full-time positions as they really needed the benefits. One day, management took him aside and told him this was not the Walmart way, and he needed to make a plan with steps on how to get a particular position. Apparently, anything full-time is not okay. Walmart wants to help you achieve your specific goals, but really Walmart wants to use you as much as they can and break your spirit. Once I had a woman who was giving me a hard time about a coupon that was expired. Coupon people are the worst. She refused to give up. She really wanted that $1 off. My line was getting really long and I was getting really frustrated. So I reached in my pocket and pulled out a $5 and said, "If I give you a $5, will you give up on this coupon?" She got angry and said, "I can't believe you said that to me." She told the CSM, but I didn't get in trouble for it. The amount of times that people ask me why we don't take coupons after they expire is ridiculous. They have a freaking date on them for a reason. I'll start with my grossest. A woman comes in with some underwear and said they didn't fit, and she wanted to return them for cash because she had already bought the correct size elsewhere. She had a receipt and plopped a Walmart bag down on the counter. Inside this bag were 6 crusty, crap-stained underwear that were a biohazard from 6 feet away. Needless to say, I did not touch them. I paged the manager on duty and he tells me to just take them back, despite being very gross. Processed the return and she happily left the store with her $8. Former cart pusher. Had an old lady try to tip me $1 after I helped her bring her newly bought plants or some crap to her car. Told her I couldn't accept it per company policy, and it was only $1, so it wasn't particularly enticing. She then proceeded to roll over in her little scooter mobile and stuff it down the front of my pants. She chuckled dirtily as she rolled away. Yo, Granny is making it rain over here. Look at all those pennies, just tossing pennies at all of those cart pushers. I love going to Walmart. I get to see all the chunky hunkies. Here, pennies for everyone. I worked for Malwart 11 years ago for a whopping total of 8 months. I worked the overnight shift as an overnight stalker for Department 8, Pets. The store I worked at had just gotten brand new high-rise shelves installed. They were said to be able to hold over a ton. Well, one night after getting all my regular freight stocked and overstock put into the bins, my bosses had me pull 8 pallets of Arm & Hammer cat litter. The boxes had a bonus 10 pounds inside, making them nearly 35 or so pounds apiece. They wanted all of those on the high risers. I asked if they were absolutely sure the shelves would be able to handle all that weight. I threw a crap fit about it because I know I was in the right for being worried. Other department managers who were there also sided with me. They watched me over the next couple of hours as I carefully did my job. As I was putting the final 12 boxes on the bottom shelf, I heard a cracking and tearing sound. And the next thing I know is I'm buried underneath all of the cat litter that had caused the shelves to collapse. Everybody in the store heard it happen, and everybody was explicitly told not to dial 911 or anything. Muck that crap. After getting all my blood cleaned from my face and cuts patched up, I called my uncles, then my girlfriend, who was a lawyer, told her what had just occurred and what the upper management is attempting to do. As of today, I still haven't spent all the money I received as a result of going to court over it. Muck Walmart. I was a department manager in frozen foods. One day, on one of my days off, so I didn't witness this. One of my employees came into work seeming very confused and disoriented. She couldn't remember the date, what day it was. Someone asked her what her name is. She couldn't remember. She clearly had what some would call a very minor case of serious brain damage. The store refused to call 911 and instead called for her mother to pick her up and take her to the hospital. Apparently, something that not everyone appears to be aware of is that if you ask someone, "What is your name?" and they respond, "I don't know," then you need to call for an ambulance. This woman had a blood vessel in her brain that popped. Her head partially exploded. It could have terminated her. And those cheap plastards at Walmart wouldn't call 911. There was also someone in produce who had a heart attack. The store didn't call 911 for him either. One of the other produce associates had to volunteer to take him to the hospital. Walmart is the only place I've ever worked at where I could say they wouldn't care if I passed on right there in the store. And it wouldn't be hyperbole. Muck Walmart. Wow, there definitely is a theme here. That's 2 stories now of people nearly just getting terminated in the store. Is there a rule or something that you just can't call 911? That's insane. Why would they do this? What's wrong with you, Walmart? I was working at Walmart at the beginning of this year. Aside from weird older men hitting on me, it wasn't that bad. A few weeks before the minimum pay was raised, they decided I needed a new position in the store. I was told that I was great with people and need to be out helping customers as opposed to checking. Sales associates get paid less than cashiers. They told me that since it was basically a promotion for me, that they would let me keep the cashier pay instead of lowering me to sales pay. I agreed to the job for that reason, plus new job was full-time. A week later, they take me to sign the papers for the job switch, and the manager gets to the pay part. He says, "I know we told you that we could keep the same pay, but it's just easier to make it the same as everyone else's. Besides, everyone's pay is going up in a few weeks anyway." So I just agreed, whatever, still going to be making more. Then my hours start getting cut. I agreed to 40 hours. I was cut down to 25. My manager said he messed up the schedule on accident and would fix it. It continued happening every week. I finally got so frustrated I just left one day and never came back. 4 hours into my first shift, I was facing items on a bottom shelf while a coworker was facing items on the top shelf. She dropped a gallon of Gatorade on my head. Management refused to let me report the injury or leave to seek medical attention. I finished the shift, dazed and in pain. The next day, I found out my skull was broken. Officially, since I was not allowed to report the injury, it didn't happen at work. I rage quit. This happened before I got hired, but I heard enough about it from coworkers. An elderly couple would come in once a week to go shopping. The old man had trouble walking, so he would kiss his wife and go sit in the fitting room area until she was done. One day, they came in and did the little kiss, and he also handed her his wedding ring, like he knew something was about to happen. A couple minutes of sitting there after his wife walked off, the guy collapsed to the floor, and the fitting room ladies called 911. One of the department managers of the time was also a paramedic, so he rushed over. The old guy started to cough up blood, and every available associate had to come and make a wall of people so customers don't see what is going on. All these associates saw and heard the guy choking on his own blood, now coming out of his nose and ears, passing on the floor. They were trying to find his wife, and no one could find her, and the associates had to wait a half an hour for the coroner to get down there and take the body. The associates who saw it still have flashbacks about it. One day, a woman stole a bottle of perfume and took it to the bathroom. She poured it out into her own container and then proceeded to fill the container with her own urine. She then took the bottle up to the returns and tried to return it. To this day, I have no idea why my manager gave her the refund. It was very obvious that the woman urinated in the bottle because it was still warm. A woman steals perfume, returns her own urine, and profits from Walmart. You know, It takes a type of crazy to actually be prepared to do stuff like that. Is that in her agenda? Is that in her calendar? Yes, today is going to be a wonderful day as I'm just going to steal some delectable perfume from Walmart and then just return it for an extra few bucks with my equally as valuable urine. That's a whole nother level of crazy. I warn you, and I warn myself, we are never going to go to Walmart late at night. Just no. Someone left a baby in a stroller just chilling in one of the aisles one night. I was a cashier at the time, so I don't know all of the details, but from what I know, authorities got involved and the guy came back after what we think was at least an hour or two, appearing oblivious to what he did wrong. I don't think he spoke much English, so it was just a confusing situation all around. Thank God for the guy stalking who was looking out. We're lucky it didn't get any worse knowing how crazy people who come through can be, let alone at night. What's weird was this wasn't even brought up again with my coworkers, so I don't recall what ended up happening to the guy. It was just another stupid thing we witnessed. The whole don't call 911 thing was standard also at Target. I worked in the deli and our gloves to clean the slicer went missing one day. They are reinforced to help in case your finger makes contact with the blade, so the blade won't slice through your finger. Well, I told my manager we needed gloves and kept reminding her every day I worked, but she would just reply with, "I've let the e-tail know." One day I'm cleaning the slicer, it's taken apart so it can't open any wider than the locked and closed position. But there's an open spot at the top where the sharpener goes. Anyway, I'm cleaning it and my finger catches the blade right on the tip and it gets cut off. I felt a sting, thought it was minor, and went to the sink. I take off my latex gloves and start rinsing and I see my fingertip is gone, just flat and pouring blood. So I wrapped it in my pure white deli coat and walk out to the deli in the front. I showed the leader on deck for the night and she freaks out, pulls me into the break room and then has somebody take me to the hospital. Some people suggested she call an ambulance after about 20 minutes of me standing at the sink bleeding. Then she pulled in a guy who was shopping that was a part-time firefighter and he took one look and said, "I should have been at the hospital 30 minutes ago." Crazy. This guy comes in on a busy day and I start ringing him up for all kinds of stuff from around the store, including the newly released PS2 and GameCube. Yeah, I worked there a lifetime ago. He writes a check and I proceed to process it in our little machine. It comes back with a suspicious error, so I tell him the machine is acting weird and outside of earshot, I call a manager over. He starts getting visibly nervous as a few CSMs, cashier managers, come over and inspect the check. They ask him a few questions and take the check and disappear, stating they need to run it on a different register and that there's nothing to worry about and they'll be right back. After a few minutes, he is sweating bullets and eventually starts slowly making his way out of electronics. His pace quickens until he's full on running for the door. I watch him from the register because, frick it, I'm not breaking a sweat for minimum wage. And bam! Our huge security guy tackles him to the ground, picks him up, and escorts him up front. At this point, I tell a coworker to take over the register, and I head up front to see what else happens. I just had a feeling. I get there to see the guy meet up with the CSMs that took the check, a handful of managers, and a few police. They present the check to him, ask where he got it, and before anyone can react, he lunges forward, grabs the check, and eats it. Dude ate the check. They wrestle with the guy a little and bring him into the back room. Customers and staff alike were staring in disbelief at what had just occurred. I found out later that the guy was traveling from Walmart to Walmart across state borders, passing bogus checks. So, yeah, normal stuff.
Middle school teachers, what is the cringiest thing you've seen a student do? Director of Technology here. I don't really have much to do with the kids at the school I work at, but I definitely have a cringy moment. Called down to the middle school from my office to debug a problem for a teacher. The classrooms in this building all have two doors. One door opens into the building hallways, the other opens to the outside. My office is across a field from the middle school, so I decide to just cut across the field and enter the side door to the classroom instead of going all the way around the field and entering the classroom from the hallway. Bear in mind that these outside doors are almost never used by anyone except for an occasional fire drill. I open the door and step in to see a room full of students facing away from me and towards their teacher. The student closest to me scrambles to click X on her browser, but not before I see full-on, hardcore yaoi hentai. Did I mention I work at a Christian private school? She turns bright red, and with visibly trembling hands, she closes her laptop lid. I burst out laughing, which interrupted the class. The teacher looks to me in questioning confusion, and the students stare in silence. I casually walked over her and said, loudly enough for the classroom to hear, "Let's not look at memes and Facebook jokes at school, guys." Her flush-red face, contorted with fear, suddenly relaxed. Her trembling hands stilled. I laughed again and went and debugged the wireless access point issue I was called down for. No point getting her expelled over hormonal changes and curiosity. Valentine's Day, and a boy brings a girl a dozen roses. They were both in my homeroom, so I watched this all go down right in front of me. I had literally never seen these two have a conversation before either. Girl didn't know what to do with roses at 7 a.m., so she threw the roses in the trash can literally 20 seconds after it happened and went on her merry way. The boy never found out. We had this one kid in our 8th grade class stick his entire hand in a cake that was being passed around for a party, grab a chunk, and started eating it like a Neanderthal. It was chocolate and his face was covered. When he finished his chunk of cake with everyone looking in disgust, he then proceeded to lick every finger. It was torture watching. He also ended up being the kid that threatened to blow up the school at the end of the year. Oh my god. I had a kid carve his own name in his desk, but he couldn't figure out how we caught him. Strange, isn't it? Around the 8th grade dance season, they call it prom, there was a whole lot of cringiness roaming the halls. One popular tactic among the boys was explained to me. We ask the girl to prom, and then we run away so she can't say no. I caught the student on Google search attempting to look me up. He spelled my name wrong, and my name is very common, so I wasn't worried. I sent him home since it was an after-school homework club, and then went through the rest of the history, which included boobs, naked women, Megan Fox nudes, and Megan Fox panties. One of the other students in the class kind of picked up on what was happening and mentioned that he has also been kicked out of the public library for similar reasons. A more innocent story? I was fixing the little girl next door's laptop. She shouldn't have a laptop, and her grandmother doesn't monitor anything she does because she doesn't know computers. I decided to peek in her computer history since she was 7 or 8 at the time. I was curious what kids her age did on the computer. Most of it was super spammy sites, but then I found a collection of how to prank call and what is Miley Cyrus's phone number? I was amused. There was always this kid that would go up to guys, shake their hands, and deeply sniff their necks. One day a teacher asked why he did this to guys, and all he said was, "If I did it to girls, it'd be weird." I once offered a boy a My Little Pony color by number sheet, ran out of Super Mario. The boy's response, "Mister, I'm not gay. I'm a lesbian. I like girls." I mean, to his credit, he's not wrong, but he is incorrect. I was demonstrating convection, which included burning some newspaper. One kid piped up with, that smells like incest." He meant incense. They were too young to get it, but I nearly died trying not to laugh. My husband teaches English at a middle school. He brought some creative writing assignments home to grade, and since I'm an assistant teacher for much younger humans, kindergarten, he drafted me into helping him sort through the mess and grade them. We've made good progress through the stack when I pick up a paper that had a kiss mark near the name in lipstick. Okay, that's odd, but I'm used to working with kids who are only just figuring out bathroom habits. A little lipstick on a report is hardly weird in my book, plus middle school. Then I see the name. Hun, who is R? Husband without missing a beat. R is this goth kid who looks like a rainbow threw up on him after having marathon screwing with a unicorn. I look back at the kiss mark. Glitter lipstick. Nice shade choice if the kid is going for goth pale. I read his creative writing assignment. I get up halfway through to go pour myself some more wine. It's an extremely well-written gay story featuring my husband and another teacher at the school. This kid is going places. I don't know what those places are, but he's going places. I had a student who would constantly butt into people's conversations, and when they asked him to mind his own business, he'd stand up and proclaim, "Nobody likes me! Everyone thinks I'm so annoying! Ha ha!" And he'd laugh while everyone awkwardly stared at him. Another kid literally told me one time that he would just act annoying so that he can impress a certain group of boys. They were not impressed. Well, at least that first kid is honest with himself. I had a 6th grader lick a book. He definitely tried to keep it on the DL, so he looked around, made sure no one was looking in his direction, and then licked the book. It was a tongue poke, then a full-out lick up the spine of the book. I had a classmate who had to give a presentation using PowerPoint. So there's a computer hooked up to a projector that is pointed at the screen that fills the wall. This guy sticks his USB with his presentation in the computer and it automatically loads the images he had on it in a gallery. He had a folder full of pictures of girls from his class he had downloaded from Facebook. That was kinda awkward. My mom is a middle school English teacher. Once, a student snuck a bar of soap into her class, ate it, and proceeded to run out of the classroom and start vomiting. Apparently, he did it to impress his friends. One of the kids responded to questions like Pikachu. Shame that a good kid is going to look back on those days with absolute horror. Not a student in particular, but a whole bunch of them. I was a substitute teacher for a few years on my university breaks, but last January was the worst middle school day I've ever had. 8th grade science class. I asked the kids to open their textbooks and work on the assignment. A girl shyly raises her hand and says, "Miss, there's something inappropriate in my book." Of course, some kid drew a member. I calmly tell her to erase it and move on. 3 more kids say the same thing. I say, "If you have something inappropriate in your book, please just erase it." Every kid starts whining about how there's members in their books. Since they won't shut up about it, I take the offending books and replace them with different books from the back of the room. Every single book had a huge member drawn in it. All 90-something of them. Crudely drawn members, artistic members, Squidward screwing SpongeBob, you name it, it was there. The kids rioted. I almost quit. I taught 4th grade last year, and I had a student who was 12 years old, middle school age, held back a few years. She always did very odd things to try to impress her classmates, but they were relatively tame. Until there was a line in the bathroom and she took her pants off, squatted over the trash can and peed. 4 or 5 girls came running out of the bathroom and told on her. I once confiscated what I first thought was a note being passed in class, but turned out to be a gay fanfic one of my students wrote, pairing 2 of her classmates. Had an 8th grade girl pretend to pass out because she was upset. She got written up for screaming that another girl was a freaking jerk in the middle of a science lesson. Then got upset when that other girl didn't also get in trouble for looking at her wrong. In the dean's office, she was so quote-unquote upset that she pretended to faint, complete with back of the palm to the forehead and dramatic exhale, and then laid on the floor until we were forced to call an ambulance. Before the ambulance came, Mom walked in, she worked right across the street, and said, "Dang it, Jennifer, we're not doing this again." So evidently, this was a regular happening around their house. At this point, the girl squinted her eyes open but refused to actually get up. When the squad got there, they checked her vitals and basically knew she was fine. They had to take her because we can't take chances with this stuff in schools. We all just kind of looked at each other and shrugged. So yeah, that was cringy. I will relay a short story that my 7th grade bio teacher told us. In that class, we dissected a cow eyeball. The year before us, a student pocketed the lens of the eye. Looks like a yellowish hard thing about the size of a peanut M&M. In his next class, he stood up and swallowed it in front of everyone. Another teacher told me about a student he had who would come to school in different costumes, ninja, soldier, etc., and stay in character the whole day. I do not remember the details, but there was an incident in which he threw throwing stars during a talent show. In 6th grade science class, our teacher asked if anyone knew what the arms of an octopus were called, and this kid immediately raised his hand and blurted out, "Testicles!" Everyone was laughing, including the teacher, who also snorted. His face was so red. Kid wore clothes to school with the price tag sticking out. When asked why, I was informed that this was to let everyone know he was wearing new clothes. I thought this was going to end with the kid having stolen them. I work for a private school. At this point, that's really all you have to say. This middle schooler recently started dating another one. The girl decided to come to school in a black leather miniskirt and black leather tank top combo. At recess, which I watched because it's a small school, she was dancing all around in front of her boyfriend and hanging off the fence a la stripper. It was hilarious and so cringy. One student wanted to ask me if I had a doppelganger. What he actually said was, "Do you have a dingleberry?" I also had a girl ask me what food stamps were, which isn't surprising because the district is very affluent. I explained, but she still seemed confused, so she asked what it means to, quote, blow a trucker for food stamps. Evidently, she was reading a book meant for a more mature audience, and her worldly knowledge hadn't caught up to her reading level yet. I organized an activity that was sort of like Never Have I Ever, but positive and meant to build empathy. Basically, a student would say, "You're in my boat if," and whatever they say that is the same as you, you have to stand up and find another chair. Great activity. One of the girls, who I often found puzzling because she just did and said things that were nonsensical, started her period and got blood all over multiple chairs. Some kids start looking at the seats and have no idea what's going on. The girls in the class figure it out but don't say anything. They just avoid said tainted chairs. The boys, however, are as dumb as a box of rocks and are touching it and sitting in the seats. I'm sitting there horrified since 1, that's disgusting, 2, I didn't initially know who was pulling a carry, and 3, how the heck do I nonchalantly stop the activity to get this biohazard cleaned up and no one really notices? After a short observation of the students, I noticed that the one girl was the unfortunate cause of all this. I told her that she was to do a favor for me, and I stepped outside. I asked her if she knew that she started her period, and she said yes. I sent her to the office and then went back in the room for damage control. I honestly don't know how I concocted a magical excuse, but I told all the kids that we were invited to go to the library for silent reading time, but had to go now because all the good squishy seats would be taken if they didn't hustle. They believed me and I sent them down there. A few girls stayed behind that figured out what happened, and I told them I knew and sent them as well. I finally got on the phone and informed the unfortunate janitor about the bloodbath in my room. This student spent an entire semester speaking in a Russian accent for an experiment. No one questioned him. First day back from winter break, he is back to talking normal. We were all incredibly confused, and his parents ended up going to the superintendent about our school allowing bullying. I teach history and let my students do a PowerPoint presentation on the history of anything. Some kid did the history of furries. He came to class wearing his fursuit. Honestly, kid's got guts. I respect him for that. I teach 8th grade. The student had talked to me previously in private about how the girl he liked was in my class the same period he was. He said that they had almost dated when they were both at their previous school before transferring to the one where I teach. On top of that, all the other students were aware that he had a major crush on this girl. So one day, he finished his classwork early and apparently he just couldn't take the hormones raging inside of him anymore. He blurts out, loud enough for everyone in class to hear, "Look, girl's name, are you gonna date me or what?" I pretend to work through this while cringing so hard on the inside. I see every other student in the room work through this, from shock to laughter to pure amazement and curiosity as to both why he would choose this moment and what on earth her response would be. The girl very politely said, "I'm just not looking for a relationship right now. Thanks for asking, though." Had a kid who legitimately believed he was a Sith, like from Star Wars. His helicopter mom would come flying down to the school crying religious discrimination if you told him otherwise. He would relax his throat and talk in a deep voice and say it was his real voice, but he disguised his voice to not scare his human brethren. On free dress days, he'd wear an all-denim outfit with high waters and denim vest over a denim shirt. I had him for science, so he blurted out things about alchemy from an anime he was into whenever we were working with the periodic table. He also had a girlfriend who lived in Mexico who was also his cousin. Humankind cannot gain anything without first giving something in return. To obtain, something of equal value must be lost. That is alchemy's first law of equivalent exchange. Not a teacher, but in 7th grade biology we dissected rats, and the teacher warned that they might be juicy from preservatives. So I grabbed my dead rat, turned it over in the air, and shouted, "You gotta squeeze the pudding out of it!" My lab mate fainted as brown juices poured onto the table. I am now an adult biologist who does not do quite the same stuff. Scratch their butt with a ruler inside their pants and then put the ruler back into the container of rulers. Not a teacher, but I interned with one recently. Apart from the kid who insisted on being called Frisk, Undertale I guess, but the craze had died down so it was just weird. There was one girl who wore a cat ear headband. Kinda cute since they were the metal silhouette type that kids wear, but she paired it with a freaking cattail. A big, black and white, furry cattail. Not a teacher, but when I was in school, those track pants with snaps down the side were popular. The boys would try to yank the pants off each other during class changes, and they all wore basketball shorts underneath. One day, some guy thought it would be funny to rip off a girl's track pants, however, she didn't have shorts on. Bright purple undies on show, and the look of terror on that boy's face was hilarious. She just ran off, and a friend followed with her pants. Just finished my first year of teaching middle school. I had one particular student who did not view me as an authority and refused to work in my class. This was especially concerning because this student was placed in an advanced class and chose not to learn purely because of who the teacher was. This also meant that the student's classmates were well-behaved, gifted students. One day, while the whole class was completing an assignment, this student was not working. When I addressed the issue, the student threw a fit and started crawling around on the floor underneath the other students' desks. Now, I don't know when you've last been in a middle school classroom, but the floor is absolutely filthy. This student thoroughly embarrassed themselves, as was evident by the looks received from the other students. The whole situation was extremely awkward for everyone, especially when the student realized that they would get no support from the other students. Kid in a fedora offering high fives in the hallway, but then dabbing just before the other person's hand made contact. It was supposed to be a prank for a vlog. I had a couple of Markiplier fangirls a couple of years ago that just gave me the heebie-jeebies. A group of about 20 kids that run up and down the halls shouting about memes. One of which, when asked what he did over the weekend, started with, "So do you know the insert obscure meme?" While making Earth Day posters, one kid tried to disguise pot leaves as palm trees. There were several "I love trees" on it. Earth Day was on 4/22, so he also wrote the first 2 with a swirl at the end, so that it looked like he'd written 420, but it just looked like 4202. I probably should keep a list, but they happen so often that I don't think I'd ever be able to keep up with it. One of my mother's students took a whole pizza in the box out of our office and just started eating. When told to stop and put it back, he licked the rest of the pizza and asked if he could have it. She said no and told him to throw it away. He started arguing that it was better in his stomach than in the trash. My mom was furious. Not a teacher, but I had a classmate on a field trip rub mud all over his clothes and body so he could go home. Turns out his mom's car broke down and she couldn't pick him up. He had to wear his muddy clothes for the rest of the trip. My friend and I got busted on day 1 of 8th grade social studies passing a crude drawing of a classmate of ours getting pleasured by 2 well-endowed men wearing party hats. I didn't think the teacher looked at it until I got summoned to the office during next period. The principal unfolded the drawing and says to us, "Can you boys explain to me what this is?" I knew I was screwed. My friend reaches over the desk and grabs it, holds it close to his face like he's scrutinizing it, and says to the principal, "It looks like a picture of classmate being pleasured with 2 large men, and I think they're wearing party hats." I freaking lost it. My friend got expelled midway through that year for threatening to kill the principal during math class. What is it with these stories and taking such wild turns? I swear! Why can't middle schoolers just be normal for 5 minutes? Not a teacher, but an illiterate girl was doing a presentation on the country of Nigeria. Yeah, I think you guys can guess how she pronounced it. Not a teacher, sorry to be that person. In middle school, my friends and I were not in the popular crowd, but one of my friends had a huge crush on the most popular boy in school who was also a major jerk. So one day, she brought him a bouquet of flowers and a heart-shaped box of chocolates. She brought the gift to him before school where he and his crappy friends hung out and asked him to be her boyfriend. I happened to be nearby and witnessed the whole thing. They laughed and laughed at her until she ran away crying. Despite riding the same bus as her, I never saw her again that school year. I saw her that summer since she lived nearby, and she told me she transferred schools because of the incident. Poor girl was brave enough to give it a shot, just to be literally laughed out of the school. I taught 5th grade recorder class as part of general music, so every kid had to play them for a quarter. It was freaking awful. 15 to 20 kids, half of whom were budding criminals, playing out of tune on plastic recorders. I was in the middle of chewing them out yet again, when I heard what sounded like a sneeze combined with a squeak. I look over, and the dumpiest, runkiest boy in the class, the gross kid, if you will, had sneezed with this recorder in his mouth and proceeded to blow clear snot through it and onto his fingers. He sat there for like 15 seconds dumbfounded, with that orange clear plastic recorder just hanging out of his mouth. Finally, I told him to just put it on the table. A few minutes later, I accidentally knocked it on the floor, and it broke, justifying my throwing it away after class. I bought a new one at the 99-cent store because I was not giving that stupid thing to anyone else. Not a teacher, but was a student. One of my classmates had a history presentation. He screamed at the top of his lungs, "Leroy Jenkins!" Nobody had any freaking clue what that meant. Everyone was staring at him while he was just smiling, scanning the room, and slowly started to realize no one knew what he said. His smile quickly went away, and he began his presentation. 2 8th grade boys invented their own language which involved anime-like giggling. Funny thing, these 2 were jocks with decent social status. We had so many parent meetings about how their son's giggling was disruptive in class. The parents were mortified, but the boys wouldn't stop. I was showing a movie once, and this girl and boy were sitting in the back next to each other in a table where 2 people could sit. Anyways, by the middle of the movie, I see the kid has his 2 hands on the table and he is looking away with his eyes wide open while the girl has her hands under the table and is slightly moving. I knew right there and then she was rubbing him. I went discreetly and stood behind them just to confirm, and yes, she was. When I tapped her on the shoulder, I guess it was the adrenaline, he finished, in her hands. The 2 students in front of them saw everything happen. There were news for about 2 weeks and the entire school knew. They're in high school now and still dating. A rare happy ending for this. I'm a male teacher. I once confiscated a note being passed between 6th grade girls. It turned out it was a list, and they ranked all the boys in the grade in terms of attractiveness. I didn't really look at it, but later I showed it to my team, and they pointed out that my name was number 4 on the list. When I was in middle school, we had this dress as an animal day, and all the other kids did stuff like wear a raccoon hat or cat ears, but I was different. I decided to go in a skin-tight How to Tame Your Dragon costume, and the worst part about it was that the yearbook committee dedicated an entire freaking page to me in that crappy costume. I was a volunteer lifeguard at a middle school gym for part of the year. This school also has a swimming month in the gym classes, where students must wear bathing suits bought or ordered via financial aid at the uniform store. There was a highly overweight girl in one of the classes, and she didn't seem to be aware of the standard issue bathing suits. The gym teacher sent home reminders the week before, but I guess she forgot. This girl was picked on a lot in general and always kept to herself. She was very shy. She never spoke. If you called on her to answer a question in front of the class, she would get teary. On the first day, the other students showed up wearing the uniform bathing suits, but she was wearing her bathing suit from home. It also wasn't a particularly pretty bathing suit, as it looked very old lady-ish and had a bright orange Hawaiian shirt type of pattern. She stuck out, which you could see in her body language really bothered her. The gym teacher ended up calling her out in front of the whole class, giving her a lecture, and giving her a detention for not wearing her uniform, because that was the rule. Her face turned bright red, and she just stood there silently while other kids stared at her and giggled. You could tell that she wanted to cry and that her soul had just crumbled. The lecture went on for a very long time. This was a gym teacher who didn't like it when the students disobeyed the rules. I was sitting off to the side, wringing my hands and bouncing my knee in secondhand embarrassment. I wish she had just read the reminder. Poor sweet child. Always read the reminders. Let's hear the other side. Guys of Reddit, what's the creepiest thing a girl has ever said to you? I remember one time, this one girl who was oddly talkative in my options and fixed income class kept talking and asking me about my personal life. Then, when she added me as a Facebook friend, there was a message with it that said, "Found you," smiley face. Pretty uncomfortable. I was talking to a girl on the phone who at the time was messed up on painkillers and started relating to me a story about how when she was 7, she pushed a girl into a pool and watched her drown. Her grandma came home, found out about it, and told her to tell the police it was an accident. That should have been a warning sign right there. I kept some of your hair. 20-year high school reunion. Copied from an email I received from a stalker 7 years ago. When you and her have your baby, rest assured, I'll be the one that raises it. No! When I was about 17 years old, I worked at a cafeteria and some girls, 11 and 13, were chasing me for weeks. They even waited in front of my door when I had to go to work to chase me all the way up there. One day I was working and the cafeteria was full with people when the 11-year-old girl said, "When can I give you head?" Everyone instantly looked at me. Uncomfortable isn't even the right word to describe my feelings at that moment. Ugh, I thought I had nothing to contribute until you reminded me. Back in middle school when I was maybe 13 or so, I used to go to a pretty large school, roughly grades 5 to 12, all in the same interconnected complex of buildings. That meant there was always a huge number of students milling around the place during lunch break, and since it was a quite large area, you were often surrounded by strangers. Anyway, at one point I heard through the grapevine, which, as a social outcast, was nothing I was terribly familiar with, that this girl a grade or two below me liked me. Being socially inept, I just checked if the girl was pretty, noticed she wasn't, and ignored the whole thing. Well, the girl didn't take being ignored for long. She got her cousin, who was more or less the bully of my grade, to pay me a visit with his cronies, pick me, and carry me to go see her one lunch period. They literally half-dragged, half-carried me across the whole school complex to see this girl and held me there while we talked. Imagine your worst early teen conversation where one party is shyly talking to her crush and the other is awkwardly trying to put her off, all while being physically restrained and watched by bullies. I suppose this doesn't really compare to the trauma of being propositioned by an 11-year-old when you're 17, but oh man was it awkward. Sadly, subsequent girls have been far less forward. Making out with the girl I was seeing, lightly slide my hand up her chest, and as my hand is going to caress her neck, she grabs it around her neck and forces me to choke her, which is fine. She then proceeded to call out her brother's name, which I assume was less fine. This happened to a friend of mine I was living with. I won't go into it, but the situation we were in demanded we shared a bunk bed. We had a rule that we could bring girls home so long as we kept the noise down. One night, while sleeping, my friend brings this girl home with him. I woke up to them coming in as they went up to his bunk to start messing around. I hear the typical stuff at first. Lip smacks, heavy breathing, some moaning. Then it happened. I heard the girl whisper to my friend the words, "Are you down with the funk?" In retrospect, my friend says he said yes because the chick was hot and he didn't want to ruin the night. So he says, "Yeah, baby, I'm down with the funk for sure." Almost immediately, the girl takes off her panties, stands up on the bunk, turns around, squats, and takes a dump. Right on his chest. Luckily for him, it wasn't the messy sort, but as you can imagine, the guy lost his crap. No pun intended. He tossed her off the bunk and started screaming for a girl to get the heck out of his house. Meanwhile, I'm on the bottom bunk laughing my butt off. So, not really the creepiest thing a woman's ever said, but now you know what the funk is. This has ruined my perception of funk music forever. I was over at her dorm room, and after we got done with our business, I spotted a bottle of my cologne on her desk. I asked her about it, and she says she sprayed it around to make her room smell like me. Okay. Next week, she gets into my car, makes a big sound, and says, "Oh, smells like you in here." She started rubbing herself. No joke. En route to Kroger. Okay. Few weeks later, at her dorm room, I decide to get a little nosy. I find the following. 1. Aforementioned bottle of cologne. 2. 2 pairs of my dirty undies, not left by me. 3, pair of my dirty socks, again, not left by me. And this freaked me out more than anything for some reason. Number 4, envelope with what I can only assume to be, drumroll, my body hair in it. Not okay. I break up with her over ICQ, the good old days. She informs me that she left a bag in my apartment. It's under my bed. In said bag is a bunch of completely random crap with Kmart tags still on it. It was obviously a plant meant to force us to have an awkward post-breakup makeup reunion. Nay, says I. Got my army buddy to drive me over to her dorm in his Ford Festiva. I saw her on the curb waiting, crying. I launched that bag out the window and we took off as fast as that Festiva would go. Never did see if the bag hit her, but given its trajectory, it's highly likely. For those who will want to know, the cologne I was wearing was Old Spice. I was dating a girl called Allison. My grandma is also called Allison. I had mentioned that I found it a little weird that they had the same name, so once as we were screwing, she asked, "Does this make you think of your grandma?" It didn't. Until then. I once went to a ski resort where people of different nationalities were there. A young Chinese girl introduced herself to me the day I was leaving and asked for my number, so I gave it to her. She called me about a week later and asked me if I wanted to go over to her place for a dinner party. I thought to myself, sure, why not? So I turn up with some booze and find about 24 young Chinese girls and no guys. None of the girls spoke any English except the girl who invited me. They sat me down at the end of the table, spoke in Chinese all night while looking in my direction and giggled all the way through. I had no idea what they were saying. At the end of the night, the hostess asked me if I would be so kind to pose for individual photos with each one of them separately. I hesitated, but went along with it. They giggled hysterically throughout, and still only spoke Chinese. No idea what the heck that was all about, but I got seriously creeped out. Edit. No banging involved, those girls were young. I'm a regular guy. Only thing I can think of is they thought maybe I looked like someone famous, though I don't think I do. Okay, some people are making a big thing about the booze thing. In Australia, it's traditional to bring some wine when invited to a dinner party. Also here, the legal drinking age is 18. The girl I met was no younger than 18, I thought, so it was all cool. I was in my mid-20s then, so by young, I meant they were too young for me, though technically it would have been perfectly legal. I'm no predator, I just like girls to be around my age, but not younger by a huge margin. Also, the hostess told me none of them ever drank alcohol, which made me think that they were slightly on the innocent side. Unrelated, but I can't even read half of these because they're so messed up. For example, a girl I hadn't even dated carved my initials into her ankle. She received no wahoo. Had a girl request me to break into her apartment, make her hot chocolate in her kitchen while she's scared in her bedroom, and then come in and bang her. You know this was all just a ruse to get you to make her a hot chocolate, right? I had a girl I once kissed at a party proceed to send me pictures of her crying, half naked, and makeup smeared all over her face Joker style. She won't stop calling me or sending random pictures of herself with distressed or angry face. This has been going on for 3 months now. This is a toss-up between, look at these, before showing me hundreds of bits of paper the girl had written my name on over and over again when we'd been out once, or the time I woke up from a lovely wahoo dream to find my girlfriend gripping my member and asking me over and over again, "Who do you think I am?" Do you want all your stuff back? After we broke up, I had not given her anything. She had stolen it all over time. She had it couriered to me. We then ended up having pillow talk a few months later over email. I found out later that it was her sister mailing. And this stuff she sent back was a photo album entirely filled with pictures of me sleeping. Good times. I had to borrow a girl's computer once for a group project in college. I got to the group meeting and there was a password. I called her and after 10 minutes, she finally gave me the password, which was her first name and my last name. Okay, but low-key, that's kind of sweet.
Your lips looked dry while you were sleeping, so I licked them for you.
Wife and I were in town with our son, visiting my parents when an old high school friend, she was only ever a friend, came by to meet my wife and 2-year-old son. After we all sat and talked for a few hours, and what after felt like a pretty normal night of company, we all got up to say goodnight and the friend hugged my wife goodbye, then turned to me, grasped me very firmly into a hug, kissed me on the lips, then whispered into my ear, "Your son should have been ours. I love you," then turned around like it was totally normal and waved goodbye to us and left. My wife didn't see or hear any of it, and I never told her. She thinks the girl is a decent person and will never see her again. I love you with all of my heart. Let's run away and get married. Not creepy yet? I was 12. She was 42. Not directly to me, but a friend of mine's mom referred to me as a tasty little snack when I was 15. And no, she was not a MILF. Not even close. I went to a football game with this girl. Afterwards, I went to meet her dad, which was already kind of weird. He said to her, "Is this the boy you've been talking about for the past 3 months?" I had known the girl for 4 days. So I did this chick that lived near me, only a few times over a few days. She got really attached to the point of freaky, so I backed off. Within a month, she was at a mental institution. 2 weeks after that, she gets back and happens to be sitting with her mom outside when I got home from work, so I could either ignore her completely or interact. I greeted them nicely and asked how she was, not mentioning where she just was. She stared at me for like a minute straight with the most blank, creepy face I've ever seen, and finally said something.
Are you the one that was controlling my mind?
Nope. I can poop bigger than you can, as she began dropping her pants. To be fair, we were only 3 or 4 years old at the time, behind my parents' garage. And though I lost that contest, I married her years later and have since upped my game. I was literally almost inside of this girl and some intimate talk is going on, and she whispers, "You know why I've always liked you?" I asked why, and she said, "You remind me of my dad." I still banged her, but I didn't call her for a while after that. Girl I had slept with 2 times, without knowing her or her friends. We were neighbors. "My friends saw you at Bar X on Saturday. I thought you said you weren't going out." "How did they know it was me? I never met any of your friends." "They've seen pictures." "Pictures of what?"
Of you sleeping.
Did anybody else get reminded of that overly attached girlfriend meme from like 12 years ago, or was that just me? In a big group of people. "Could I have some vodka?" "You've had way too much." "I'll give you head for some vodka." "I'm good." "I'll do it anyway." She told me she wanted to be the father of our children. Let that sink in for a bit. This one's a bit of a long one, and it's kind of gross, so just a fair warning. I'm 20. A pretty sort of rock and roll 24-year-old girl asks me out at the spring this past summer. I say yes. We have a decent date. She says she's leaving the next morning for New York City for a month's time. I figured this means she wants purely to use me for wahoo because she asked me to come over at 12:30 at night and has been out drinking with friends. I say yes. She comes over. We have fun. She was uncoordinated and spoke atrocities while we did this awfully clumsy mushing. The worst I've ever experienced, blame on her behalf. After, I expect her to believe because she's verbalized that she has a flight at 10 a.m., but no, she lingers. For hours. Until well past 5 a.m. I can't bring myself to hint that she should leave, so I go with it. Lying naked next to me, breaking a long silence of hours in which I've fallen asleep, she wakes me and says, "When I was 12 to 15 years old, demons would try and enter my spirit, my soul, late at night while I slept. It wasn't sleep paralysis. I know so." You can imagine the terror as my eyes grew wide and I grew rigid, staring at the ceiling above me in the blackened room. She continues, "They succeeded once, and I became possessed. I couldn't control myself. I started hurting myself and becoming intimately violent. Sometimes, I think they're coming back for me. I want you to hurt me so they can't." I had to kindly show her out after explaining that I was growing much too uncomfortable. The worst part, I wake up the next morning and expect the protection we had used, now lying on the floor, as I pick it up to trash it. Part of why our intimacy felt strange was that there was some texture I felt unfamiliar. Blood. Blood everywhere. It had just been overlooked the night prior due to my bedspread being all black. Man, the blood. So, a girl had a crush on me. One morning when I came home to my place, there was a bag hanging on my front door. I bring it inside and see what's in it. I find a new set of pencils. There was also a spoon that you used to feed babies along with a bottle of baby food. A tiny pink hair clip I'd imagine a 9-year-old girl might wear. A 3-page letter telling me the letter was written by a Polish girl who just moved into town. She called herself Tatiana Dongchert. I think it's Polish, I'm not entirely sure. And she wanted to meet new people in town. So she asked if I wished to bake Doppler cookies with her down by an abandoned warehouse at the docks. Yes, that is what she wrote. Then, as the letter progressed, the text looked more and more as if someone wrote it while driving a bike. At the end of the letter, it was more like random words. Later that same week, someone tried to open my door in the middle of the night. Then another week passes, and I get a visit at 5 in the morning from some staff from a home nearby where she apparently lived. They told me they found her sleeping in my bushes and that she had run away every night for the last 2 weeks and that she was very ill at the time. They gave me a number to call in case of an emergency. I did not sleep well that following month. Hold on, stop. That's my husband calling. The husband that she said she divorced from who was overseas in Iraq. She wanted me to wait in silence until after the phone call to get right back at it. Stood by the door the whole time, too, to make sure I didn't leave. Nope. Special Cambodian spice. It didn't sound creepy at the time, but I'd asked my wife of 25 years what the unusual black seasoning on the meal she'd just given me was. Turned out, it was a pharmaceutical in the class of beta blockers. By pure luck, I ate only maybe 1/10 the amount present rather than all of it. An hour later, I nearly died. Weak and intermittent heartbeat. A few months before she'd got me to take out life insurance. Beta blockers in more than tiny amounts stop the heart. Looks like a natural heart attack. She's Cambodian, by the way. Yeah, because I was really wondering about the veracity of your statement regarding her status as Cambodian, when I'm more concerned about the fact she nearly killed you, dude! My first girlfriend, read-only girlfriend, found me packing my stuff to get the heck out and pulled a sword on me, like a real katana. Said if I packed another freaking thing, she would cut off my head and keep it in a jar. I very carefully explained that I was just moving things, all was well. I hugged the psycho, then left in the dead of night and spent the rest of the night at the train station till I could get the heck out of Dodge. For the next 6 months, she sent me nightly messages on various websites accusing me of being a demon and attacking her while she slept in the dream world, and I should be careful because she was going to fight back with witchcraft. Then, she recruited other crazies, and they were saying the same crap. There was this army of her and a bunch of underage girls, one of which was apparently my then 23-year-old ex-girlfriend's new true love, waging internet war on me for being an evil dream demon and trying to take over the dream world. Since then, yeah, pretty much double rainbow gay. Dudes aren't freaking insane, and when they are, you can tell pretty easily. I found half a bag of toenail clippings in her closet, and when I confronted her about it, she said, "Yeah, I like to save them for later when I want a midnight snack." I got the heck out of there, needless to say. Over at the apartment of some girl I knew from wherever, and basically there to just have wahoo, just going through the formalities of acting like we're not, she pulls out a photo album. First and ever page, a miscarried baby, dressed up in a bonnet on a silk pillow. I actually found it reassuring that the pictures weren't just thrown in with our other family photos. 4th of July at Uncle Ted's, Labor Day, dead baby, dead baby, dead baby, Thanksgiving, dead baby's first Halloween, Catwoman of course, Christmas after that crazy blizzard on Mount Hood, dead baby, ooh, ski trip. Ex-girlfriend of almost a year, who I thought had moved away, bombarded me at work one day and said, "Look what I did for you. Will you take me back now?" She had the Chinese characters for "I love you" and my initials tattooed on her arm. I would have to say when a girl I barely knew figured out my class schedule, she would leave me letters in sealed envelopes, giving them to my teachers to give to me. This one time, me and this girl who seemed interesting enough had a conversation. "If you'd have to kill me, how would you do it?" What? Do I really have to answer? "Yes, I need to know." "Well, I'd probably shoot you, something quick and painless." "Aw, why not just stab me into the stomach with a rusty knife?" "Abandon ship! Abandon all hope, ye who enter!" I had a girl open with a necrophilia joke. That's how far she got all night. Just a quick heads up, exploitation of minors in this one. This will probably get buried, but I knew a girl in high school that was pretty sought after. She was small, blonde, busty, and had a killer smile. She loved gaming, anime, sweet tea, boiled peanuts, the whole shebang. I never bothered flirting with her or anything because she just always had so many guys practically tripping over one another to talk to her or sit next to her at lunch. We had computer and geometry class together and sat right next to each other through assigned seating, so we got to talking here and there and had a lot of laughs. We started enjoying it so much that we started writing each other notes back and forth in class, then entire letters throughout the whole day. Then she started inviting me over to stay the night. Her parents were okay with it, and they never came to check on us or anything. I got the impression that I was not the first boy she brought home, so of course we had wahoo, and I lost my virginity that night. Things are going smoothly over the next couple weeks, and she starts stepping it up on the kinky meter. First she admits that she thinks threesomes are interesting. Okay. Then she says she likes furries. Alright. Then that she likes older and younger men. I don't even know what the heck that means, but this girl is letting me sleep with her on a regular basis, so I don't care. Then the letters she starts writing me in class get really graphic, asking questions like what would I do if my dad walked in on us doing it, and if he would join, or if I would come to her house after school and pee on her in her bathtub. At this point, I put a lot of space between us, and a couple of days later, she confesses to me that she cheated on me in a threesome with 2 older men. She was really broken up about it, but I saw it as a get-out-of-jail-free card. A year later, she starts dating a friend of mine who was only 15. Keep in mind, she was about 20. I warned him that she was a bit loose in the head, but being 15 and with the busty blonde, he didn't care either. Past time forward again, I go to hang out with them at his house. Turns out she's pregnant and they're hiding it as best they can. Things come to a head when his parents find out. Cops get called. They find pictures of them banging together, which was exploitation of a minor. So they raid her house. They find that her parents are drug dealers and an immense amount of CP on her computer, some that include herself when she was younger. Turns out, her mother used to make the videos of her sleeping with older men and would sell them. Needless to say, she's in jail now and there is an ongoing custody fight. TLDR, lost my virginity to a cheese pizza actress. Got stalked by a crazy. Followed our band around for a while, but I wasn't interested as I had my eye on someone else at the time. I was playing a gig at a pub, she walked in, took off her clothes in front of the stage, took a knife out of her handbag, declared her eternal love while touching herself, and threatened to kill any woman that went near me. I'd never spoken to her or anything else before. The police eventually took her away, but I was reminded of my grandfather's advice at the time. If you're gonna date a woman, date the one that irritates you the least and never, ever date crazy. Good advice, but what if you'd never spoken to her before or shown any interest? The woman had a history of mental issues stemming from a brutal childhood. She was committed to long-term care, and it turned out she had a thing for musicians, as other fellows I knew had the same experience with her at various venues. Stunning-looking woman, but not playing with the full deck at the time. I hope she's got herself sorted out since then. Not to me, but here's the deal. This happened not very long ago to a friend. He tried online dating, and some cute girl messaged him to hang out one night. Verified her, and she looked the real deal. Gets to her place, and she's dressed up to go clubbing with another friend of hers who's on the computer. As he walks in, her friend yells, "Oh my god, I got another one! We're at 6!" My friend raises an eyebrow but hangs out for a bit. They start chatting and drinking, all is good. And then, by surprise, like 4 other guys show up minutes apart. She walks to where they are and says, "We only need 2 more," or something like that. At this point, my friend is freaked out and asks what the heck is going on. Turns out these girls were deciding to invite all the tall guys on the site and then making them compete for their attention in person. Game show type environment. TLDR, some girls on a dating website invite a whole bunch of guys to their place and play "I only want the best, the rest can leave." Now that's creepy. Make-A-Wish recipients and workers. What were some wishes you had to say no to? Make-A-Wish wish granter here, and I have to say it is the ultimate sadness when we have to stop the process because a non-custodial parent won't sign the paperwork. It's happened far too often. Usually the wishes we had to say no to were from the kids' family members. There was always some uncle, grandma, cousin, sibling, or parent who wanted to hijack the kid's wish. A classmate of mine, now passed, got a meet and greet with Sammy Sosa. The understanding from the Make-A-Wish people was that Sammy would sign autographs and sit with the family for a while. Now, this kid was all about Sammy. He had his jerseys, loved Sammy's little leaps after home runs, and if I recall correctly, even was big into Pepsi because of Sammy too. When the day came, Sammy showed up late. He didn't respond when the family greeted him. It was described as a sullen silence. Signed a glove and then walked away. My classmates started crying once it was clear Sammy was not going to come back. Right when the parents were about to leave, another baseball player named Corey Patterson saw my classmate, came up, signed everything they had, and talked and joked around with the family for over a half hour. Corey became my classmate's favorite player that day, and I think he lived perhaps a year after that moment. At his funeral, my classmate's picture with Corey was one of the prominent pictures. That moment and day truly, truly meant the world to him. He was around 10 to 11, if I recall correctly. To this day, I'm unsure if someone from Make-A-Wish found Corey or if the moment was as spontaneous as it was described to me, but no matter what, Corey will always have a special place in my heart because of that story. I, of course, was not there, and I'm not a primary source for Sammy's interactions with my classmate, but I know and trust the family. One thing that a couple of Anons have pointed out that I think is worth mentioning is that it seems unlikely that Make-A-Wish would organize a meet and greet with Sammy Sosa, gently suggesting I was misremembering the context. The Anons argued that it's more likely their meet and greet would be with the Cubs team as a whole, and that this changes the context of Sammy's actions if the meet and greet wasn't directly with him. What I do remember is that this story really rocked our tight-knit community, but made us that much more appreciative of Corey Patterson. My little brother has had 2 heart transplants so far, and will probably get another one before it's all said and done. His wish was to go to Nintendo. Well, Nintendo Japan doesn't grant wishes, but Nintendo of America does. He stayed in Seattle for a few days and had a day-long tour of Nintendo. Unfortunately, Reggie wasn't in the office that day, but the Treehouse staff led him around all day. This was right before the Switch came out, so we got to play Breath of the Wild before anyone. They gave him a sweet goodie bag and let him go on a shopping spree in the employee store. I received a wish when I was 15. At the time, I was madly in love with Harry Styles and of course wanted to use my wish to meet him and spend the day with him. After telling the wish coordinator this, she broke the news to me that if I were to meet him, it will be a year from then, with about 15 other kids for a very brief moment, a hello and a photo. Upon hearing that disappointing news, I changed my wish and instead went to Australia for 10 days with my family and swam in the Great Barrier Reef. Just for some background, both my sister and I are pretty dang sick, and so we had the rare occasion where we both got wishes. My family suggested that we just do one, but Make-A-Wish was adamant that we each got our own. My sister's Make-A-Wish was to meet Taylor Swift. We flew to Nebraska for 2 days, got in the same meet and greet line as people who won radio contests, took a picture with Taylor Swift, and that was that. I, on the other hand, asked to meet Christopher Nolan. He had never been requested for a wish, so we were flown to LA where we got a tour of the Warner Brothers lot and then had a private lunch with Nolan and Emma Thomas, his wife. We hung out for 2 hours where they finally left because they had some film-related thing to do. We found out later that he'd only agreed to an hour, but during the lunch insisted that he stayed longer. It was quite interesting how we both had celebrity wishes and they both turned out so differently. I asked for a shotgun because I was into clay shooting. They said no. Went for a rally driving day. They picked my family and I up in a limo. drove us 2 hours to the place, and then I had the whole place to myself and lots of time behind the wheel. It was great. They paid for pro pictures and a meal after for my family and my godparents' family. Even just gave me some spending money. I had a great time. 10 years later, still alive. And hopefully have that shotgun? This isn't my personal story, but one of my uncle who passed away shortly after I was born. He loved the Terminator so much that he wanted nothing more than to meet Arnold Schwarzenegger. Due to having a busy schedule, Arnold's agent had to deny him of his wish a couple of times, was filming for the second Terminator. My uncle was so determined to meet Arnold that he then changed his wish to meeting Maria Shriver, Arnold's wife. Because of his determination, he was allowed on set of Terminator 2 Judgment Day. He got to meet Arnold, Maria, and Arnold's stunt double. My mom still has the pictures and it makes my heart soar. Make-A-Wish is fantastic and I'm so glad my uncle got to live out his dream. My condition prevented international travel, so even though my top wishes were to go to Japan or to the UK to meet J.K. Rowling, those were denied. I ended up doing a shopping spree at Mall of America, which sounds kind of lame, but I grew up poor and had a lot of fun being able to just buy things for myself without worrying. First thing I bought was a new pair of glasses, since my old ones were scratched to crap and too weak anyway. When I was in college, I had a good friend named John. We were both in automotive 8 hours a day for 2 years. One day, we grabbed sushi on lunch, and he casually mentioned at 12 years old, current age 20, he was a recipient of Make-A-Wish. He asked for sushi and just sushi. You could see his eyes light up just telling the story. They set him up with a private lunch at a local sushi bar where he had the entire selection of sushi rolls laid out in front of him with each and every possible condiment, roll, and side. Not an expensive or grandeur request, but Make-A-Wish went above and beyond. I've been the recipient, and later on after my health improved, I volunteered as a wish coordinator. My original wish was to attend the Oscars. That got denied by the Academy as they do not grant wishes. I wound up going to the People's Choice Awards as a VIP. Make-A-Wish flew my family to LA for a week, all expenses paid. They got us a limo for the show, paid for my dress, hair, and makeup, we walked the red carpet, and were seated very close to the stage. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. The generosity of the volunteers is remarkable. They even had someone greet us at the airport on arrival. It was extremely important to me that my brother and sister were included in my wish because my illness had robbed them of part of their childhoods. I am forever indebted to everyone who made my wish possible. When I turned 18, I decided to volunteer as a wish coordinator to give back to an organization that did so much for me. I met with wish kids and their families. We would always arrive with a gift for all of the children of the family based on a little survey they filled out. We'd talk with the child and help define their wish. It's important to determine the child's true wish and make sure that it isn't influenced by parents. The most common wish is to go to Disney. Celebrity meet and greets are the ones that often can be turned down. First, because it's undefined what a meet and greet is. It could be the child literally waving at someone and no one wants that. And second, because not all celebrities grant wishes or can schedule time to meet wish kids. The coolest wish I worked on was a shopping spree for a boy who was confined to his room. He got $7,000 to go buy video games, TVs, a tricked out lazy boy, etc. for the ultimate gaming setup. I worked with a guy who was a Make-A-Wish kid, and he said he wished for a puppy and was denied. It makes sense that they're not going to give live animals to a little kid. Well, it's between that and the shotgun. When I was a baby until I was 5, I had cancer and got some wishes. My first wish was for a computer. I only wanted a computer because it came with a mouse. Yes, I thought it came with a real mouse. So, obviously it was rejected because you can't have pets when you basically live in a hospital and my family is broke anyway, so they couldn't give us a pet. I ended up getting some dope googly eye glasses and an epic trip to Disney World. It was the only family vacation we ever got to go on. I didn't know the kid at all, but he died from cancer his senior year of high school when I was a sophomore. We had an assembly for him. His name was Tyler. His wish was a gift to his best friend. Tyler went to a computer store with his friend and asked him to show him the best computer there. Then Tyler bought the best computer there for his friend using Make-A-Wish donation money, only to die a little later. Such a selfless guy. Tyler met Imagine Dragons 3 years before his death and they became friends. Imagine Dragons dedicated It's Time to Tyler. Whenever I hear that song, I think of this. It chokes me up every time. I worked for Make-A-Wish, Junior Genie as I like to say. We had to say no to wishes all the time. Either the person the kid wanted to meet didn't grant wishes, the place they wanted to go to didn't grant wishes, their wish was ridiculously expensive or prohibitive, their doctor didn't sign off on the wish as it wasn't a good idea for their health, and so on. For the most part, our volunteers were pretty good at helping kids zero in on that perfect wish. I've helped coordinate some wishes that I was surprised to see were approved. Usually it's trips to far distances with a lot of stops and long stays. It's one thing to go to Japan. It's another to go to Japan for 2 weeks. It's another to go to Japan for 2 weeks and go to 10 different attractions. Not all of them give us free tickets. Many don't even give discounts. Most kids had cookie-cutter wishes. Disney World, Paris, meet the president, etc. Those were my bread and butter. I hate to call them cookie cutter because I know it's such a precious memory for the kid and their family. Working there was a precious memory for me too. And I enjoyed coordinating everyone's trips. Unusual, frequent, high medical needs, lots of family, what have you. It was such an amazing thing to be a part of. I knew a friend who had cancer and overcame it, and he talked about Make-A-Wish. If it's not accepted, you apparently get a first-class trip to Disney World most people can't afford. He said he went to Disney World because he wanted to beat a skater that was in Europe on some tour. I was really lucky to have my Make-A-Wish granted, and I just want to say they really go above and beyond. My mom has always talked about going to Hawaii, and we knew it was pretty unrealistic for a family of 4. I was pretty young when I made my wish, so I didn't even know all that Hawaii had to offer, but I chose to go there for my wish. They put us up in a penthouse suite on Waikiki Beach, and I've never experienced anything more special in my life. Everything and everyone there wanted to make sure my family had an unforgettable time, and we sure did. We were able to forget about the cancer for a little while and feel like a normal family again. Thank you so much to Make-A-Wish and all that contribute. I have experience with Make-A-Wish in the last year due to my son's condition. This was a question I asked, and the response I was given was they will do anything they can within reason. One kid wanted a swimming pool in his backyard, and they did that. Because of how the process goes with Make-A-Wish, they ask the kid a lot of questions to determine what the child wants and to ensure there isn't any influence from the parents. My wife and I sat with my son while they asked him a lot of questions over about a 1-hour period to determine what he wanted to do. They asked my wife and I to sit there silently while he answered honestly. We are going to go to Legoland and meet Darth Vader sometime in 2019. I was a Make-A-Wish kid around 20 years ago. I was 5. I asked to be turned into a dinosaur. They said no. 0 out of 10, worst organization, they hate kids, boo. A couple of years ago, I went to Disney at Orlando, and there was a little boy running around wearing a shirt that said, "I'm a Make-A-Wish kid." My friend had to comfort me when I cried because the toddler's mom and aunt told the pretzel vendor his Make-A-Wish was originally, "Make mommy happy." I got genuinely emotional reading that, and I'm so glad I'm not crying on mic right now. The moment I met with the workers, I asked to go to the moon, but was turned down. Tried to compromise with space in general, ended up going to Italy. Not as cool. One of my nieces is a Make-A-Wish recipient. She had stage 4 rhabdomyosarcoma. They flew her, her sisters, her dad, and her grandma to Disney World, and they had the time of their lives. She's 6 years cancer-free and still talks about how grateful she was for that trip. She's just turned 14, and her younger sister talks about how it was her only plane ride ever. That organization is amazing and will forever have all of our support. I would like to add that the Ronald McDonald House Charities is another amazing organization that put my family up for housing in Manhattan during her treatment, over 2 years in the hospital at a minimal cost. Before that, we were driving 3 hours each way every time she needed chemo. Also, shout out to the Sloan Kettering Oncology Ward for taking care of her and making her feel like a kid while she was going through treatment. I think we all know by now the comedian who had a kid request he show up to the child's funeral dressed as a giant member. Kid made it through his illness. The comedian is named Russell Howard, and I gotta say, laughter is the best medicine. My son chose a Disney cruise. He didn't even hesitate in his pick. Probably because we were on day 1 of a Disney cruise we had been planning for over a year when he took a small tumble in our stateroom and wound up breaking his femur. Because, unbeknownst to us, his leg was filled with Ewing sarcoma. This trip he had been looking forward to for so long was destroyed before it even really started. So when it was wish time, he asked for a redo of our cruise. We waited until he had been off of chemo for a couple of months, and we had a wonderful time. We even added days on at Disney World from our DVC timeshare after the cruise. Both the Make-A-Wish folks and the Disney cruise employees told my son to make sure he wore his Make-A-Wish shirt to the parks when we were there. He did one of the days, and even though that wasn't part of his wish, the Disney cast members all treated him great. It was so nice to see him have such a wonderful trip after a ruined dream vacation and a year of non-stop hospital stays. By the way, he is doing great now. He hit 2 years off chemo this past September. I got a wish as a kid, then survived. The biggest, best thing I could think of was to go to Chuck E. Cheese's. I have no idea why I was fixated on that. To the credit of some good peeps, to Chuck E. Cheese's I went. I couldn't be around other people, so they opened it up at night. People deep cleaned it, sterilizing each ball in the ball pit. There was dedication there. Then someone who was cleared medically worked it. Don't remember most of it, was pretty young, mostly just remember the bits I found exciting, but that dang rat casino still makes me smile whenever I see one. Moral of the story, never bet against Make-A-Wish when dealing with logistics. Every ball in pit. Kid I know got cancer in elementary school. He was always into history and US presidents, so we asked to meet him. They flew his whole family out to DC to meet George W. Bush. Also, he actually spent more time with them than was allotted in his daily planner according to the dad. The kid beat cancer and is still doing okay. Not a recipient, but worked at a Hard Rock Cafe. A Wish kid's wish was to see Paul McCartney live, so they came in to eat dinner before his concert down the road from the restaurant. We sat him next to some signed Beatles guitars and sheets of lyrics and the such. As an avid Beatles fan myself, I was able to serve them. I sat and talked with that 6-year-old about the Beatles for a good hour, played all the Beatles songs, and had their music videos playing on the TVs throughout the restaurant. It was super humbling with how excited this kid was to go see Paul and just be able to be outside the hospital for the night. And also super heartbreaking seeing his dad's face the whole dinner. I've never seen such pain, and I think about him frequently. I'm from Minnesota. When I had leukemia 30 years ago, I remember my wish was to go to the Grand Canyon. My parents straight up vetoed me. And instead the family, 2 sisters, went to Disney World and other Orlando attractions through the Give Kids the World program. It was the right decision, but still. Was it the right decision? Because it sounds to me like Disney World is full of more Make-A-Wish kids than actual people. Also, the Make-A-Wish Foundation should have let you have your wish in spite of your parents. That's the whole reason they had those conversations with you. I got offered a Make-A-Wish when I was 5 years old because I had leukemia. My parents declined their offer because my survival rate was very, very likely, and they wanted another kid who was less likely to survive have it. After I was cured, they took me and my twin brother to Disneyland to celebrate using their own money. My parents are wonderful people. In this thread, wish denied, went to Disney. My son was a Make-A-Wish recipient. He wanted to go to Europe. They were planning it, and his piece of crap birth father wouldn't allow my kids to get passports. Great father, huh? Son had like 36% chance of survival from brain cancer, and he said no passports. Anyways, his second wish was an RV trip to the Badlands, Yellowstone, and the Rockies. They got us the biggest bus type, think it's A-class, RV they could get. Set everything up for us, gave us itineraries, and off we went. It's such an incredible organization, and luckily, my son had a blast after finally having the okay to go. He's also in remission and doing well, thank God. Make-A-Wish is incredible. Fun fact, the amount of kids that wish to go to Disney World is so large that Disney built its own resort for them called Give Kids the World, where only families from Make-A-Wish can stay. They have special buses to transport them, doctors are always on staff, and there's special games and activities at the resort for kids who can't make it to the park that day. I adore Make-A-Wish and everything it's done for kids. It helped send my friend to the Bahamas when she was sick, and she said it was one of the best experiences of her life. It was mentioned several times below, but Give Kids the World was actually made by Henry Landworth, a Holocaust survivor. My daughter was granted a wish. She really wanted to meet Taylor Swift and see her in concert, but Taylor was not touring at the time, so we, her parents, kiboshed that wish. She was not healthy enough to enjoy a long concert, and I didn't want her to postpone her wish since we weren't sure if or how long she might live. In the end, she chose to go to the SeaWorld Resort in Florida and swim with the dolphins. She ended up being scared to death of them and refused to even go in the water. Make-A-Wish sent us to Universal while we were there too, and she had fun. That was 6 years ago, and she is now in remission. We took her to a Taylor Swift concert this last summer, and I think she enjoyed it way more than she would have 6 years ago. So when I was 15, I got to make a wish. My uncle really pushed to ask to meet Tiger Woods and play golf with him. I wasn't into that. Neither were my cervical tumors. I was getting better, and I knew I was going to be okay. I told the wish peeps that I wanted to bow out, but they were pushy. Right in front of my mom, I said I wanted to hit a blunt with Snoop Dogg and wouldn't accept any other wish. That got shut down. I'm fine and 34 now. We did the standard Disney World trip. My son only had months to live, and we had a small window when he was well enough to go. Bruce was 5, so he didn't really have any big or creative ideas. He'd only been to Disney World once for a single day, and my husband wasn't able to come. He told the wish grantees that he wanted to show Daddy the giant castle and ride roller coasters with no lines. Even though it seemed like the cookie-cutter wish, my son's Make-A-Wish experience was truly amazing. I still cry thinking about how much that trio meant to him and our entire family. My son was treated like absolute royalty during the entire trip. Volunteers we met at Give Kids the World, the resort where we stayed, really connected with him, and even flew in from states away when he was on hospice and for his funeral. I love reading about the amazing and unique experiences that others request. I will definitely be following this post. We became so close with our wish granters. Those people are truly angels in this earth. I am so thankful to everyone involved in Make-A-Wish, donors, volunteers, everyone. This organization made such a huge impact on our lives, and we made memories that our family will cherish forever. This doesn't answer your question, but I had cancer when I was 3 and apparently have been approached by Make-A-Wish. Unfortunately, I was only 3 and too young to actually make a reasonable wish, so the wish fell to my parents. They asked for furniture. Furniture! I'm told that I was very sarcastic, even at a young age. When they told me I could wish for whatever I wanted, I thought I could think of something impossible. A big brick house, so the big bad wolf can't blow it down. Make-A-Wish people said that they ran out of bricks granting their last wish. They handed me a catalog of playhouses to choose from. I defiantly flipped immediately to the back and poked one at random before probably returning to my Studio Ghibli movie. And that is the story of how Make-A-Wish built me a 2-story playhouse with heating, air, and electricity. I'm so glad they ran out of bricks. My mom became a wish granter shortly after my son went on his Make-A-Wish trip. She's done many wishes and has even been wish granter of the year for her region a couple times. The only one that was a flat-out no was one recipient who asked for a sexual favor. Other than that, wishes for new cars are always a no, but Make-A-Wish will basically pimp out a car already owned by the recipient. Other than that, she's been a wish granter for everything from trips to shopping sprees to even being on an episode of Fixer Upper where she was wish granter for 2 boys who wanted an accessible playground in their backyard. I got to have mine granted in 1999 when I was 8. I wanted to see my 2 favorite baseball players, Mark McGwire and Chipper Jones, play. Make-A-Wish set up everything. Hotel, tickets to the game for my whole family, and even tickets to Six Flags. Before the first game, they brought us down for batting practice. Got to meet the whole Braves lineup. Didn't meet a single player from the Cardinals, and we were told McGwire specifically declined the request. Braves won that game. I feel karma paid off too. Braves made it to the World Series, Chipper won MVP, and is now a Hall of Famer. McGwire would later get marked for using steroids, will not make the Hall of Fame, and Cardinals finished under 500. My mom worked for Make-A-Wish. A little kid wanted to build a treehouse in his front yard. Make-A-Wish denied him for being too hard to coordinate. Make-A-Wish must not have approached the right people. I've been in construction for a long time. I could get about 30 qualified people together on short notice to build a treehouse for a terminally ill kid in a weekend or so. Shout out to Ron Swanson's old man on Reddit for that comment. Username checks out. Men of Reddit, who have found out their child isn't actually theirs? How did you react and how are things now? When I was in the Navy, I had an on-again, off-again relationship with a girl back home. On my last deployment, my girlfriend told me via email that she was knocked up. I accepted it, emailed my parents, told the military, all that jazz. I ended up getting discharged, so I went back home and took care of my pregnant girlfriend. She had the baby, and I thought I was the father for 5 months, while she was on vacation with a girlfriend. While she was gone, I got an email from her boyfriend telling me that they had been together for the last 4 months, and also for the week in Myrtle Beach I was bankrolling. After that, I got the paternity test, found out it wasn't mine, and told her I was done and wanted no contact. Crappy part is, my parents still babysit and treat the kid like their grandkid, so she's at a lot of family functions and such. Also, the guy wasn't even the father. Forget her. I had a fiancé. We were supposed to be getting married. Then she went on a holiday by herself because she just needed to get away. She came back pregnant to an unemployed heroin user. I had a job and an apartment. She told me, "You've never done anything to prove you really loved me. Now's your chance. Accept me and the baby." No thanks. Last I heard of her, she's an unmarried mother of 2, and forget her. This one's a long one, so be ready for that. 2 years of DNA tests that the state continually reported as inconclusive. It led to going someplace out of state. Got it done. Got the test results back. Less than 2% probability of genetic match. Huh. So, I called her up. Asked, "So, you want to tell me what the real story is?" 2 weeks before we had our night under the sheets that resulted in the talk 9 months later, her father had come home drunk out of his mind and forced himself upon her. I still recall the tone of her voice asking me if I had actually taken the test and that it was real. Well, turns out her mother heard that conversation, notified someone, and dad took a DNA test. So her dad is the dad of her kid. And I felt horrible for her. I can't even joke about this. Her dad was arrested, the kid last I heard was doing well. It forced her to clean up her act. She'd gone in for heavy drug and alcohol use and it drove us apart before the child did. And that was 10 or so years ago. We don't talk. Every once in a while I'll think about the kid, but I don't know. This world ain't a nice place. And with all the crap she'd gone through, I wasn't going to make it worse. So I left it alone. From what little I heard from mutual friends over the years, apparently dad came out of prison 3 years later a Bible guy. This all took place in Texas, by the way. Supposedly he was doing his best to support her and whatnot, but there was some kind of falling out and she moved out and in with one of her girlfriends up in Dallas. I can't even fathom it, to be honest. I still consider the man to be scum-sucking trash for putting his daughter through all that, and I can't exactly fault her at all for her literally wanting me to be the father. She was so hoping that it was the case because it reviled her. The sobbing on the phone when the realization hit was shattering. I remember being on the phone for hours, most of it her crying. I recall my mom after the fact telling me I should have sued her. In my mind, it was done. I had 2 years of my life interspersed with phone calls, genetic testing visits, even bounty hunters showing up at my door in place of work serving me with notices from her family to show up or else. She had to raise this kid with her crappy father the whole time being ignorant. All that time? It's awful. A lot of you asked why I left her, why she didn't get an abortion, etc. First of all, when she had originally called me and we had the talk 9 months later, I asked her what she wanted to do. Originally, she wanted to abort it. This was back in 2003-2004, so access to clinics was readily available. I asked if that's what she really wanted. She insisted, and I had sent her a money order to help pay for it. She never got the abortion. I originally got a story. She went in, took the pill they gave her, and it made her so sick she left. I was 22 to 23 and didn't really know anything about how they do abortions. What we learned in high school involved either the scrape or the vacuum cleaner methods, so I took her word for it. Sometime later, she went to the courts, at her family's insistence, and wanted me to provide child support, and that's when I had the choice to either pay for it or get the testing. Talking it out with my parents, because if I knew what I was doing, I decided on getting the test done. If I was going to pay for it, best to make sure I was the one who should have been responsible. At this point in our relationship, it had been about a year since that night we got down and dirty, and broke up about 3 to 4 months after that night. I had moved back home with my parents. The job I had in Houston went out of business, I was out of money and had no other options. We broke up due to her frequent alcohol and drug usage. I never understood the need for anyone to get completely wasted on alcohol. 1 to 2 drinks? Fine. Smoke some dope? It's fine. Cocaine? What the heck? No. So I ended it. And this was all before I'd even learned she was pregnant. The first test, for whatever reason, took dang near 6 months before anyone heard anything. The results came back inconclusive. I never got any more information than that, so either something happened at the lab or I don't know. I wound up getting referred to a place about an hour away from my parents and went there to get it all done. So by the time 2 years since that night of conception rolled around, we finally had the results in. I remember opening the envelope and looking the sheet over. A lot of it I didn't understand. I did see less than 2% chance of genetic match. I called the number at the top of the form and spoke to a woman, provided the info, and she took me through it. There was absolutely no way I could be the father. Now, I'll admit, I was elated at first. I thanked the woman, hung up, and looked at my cell. I had to call her. And reality set in. I called her. After all the crying and admissions, I asked what really happened the day she claimed she went in for the abortion. On her way to the clinic, she said something inside her clicked, and she wanted to keep it. The roughly $600 I had sent, she used it for clothes and stuff for the baby. I asked why she couldn't have just been honest from the start, and the results of the test were why. Some of you asked why I didn't become the child's father, because I wasn't ready for it at that point in my life. 23 years old, no job, no prospects, thousands of miles gone, and I never got along with her family. It wouldn't have been good for either of us. In the end, we agreed not to be angry with one another. She was mad at her father though. I don't know if that ever went away, though I highly doubt it did. Also, I wasn't ripping on Texas. I actually really like Texas. The people are friendly. I simply wanted to provide some geolocation to what happened is all. I spent 2 years living in Houston working for a local IT firm. Met a lot of great people, had some amazing barbecue. Seriously, it's like you can't go 2 blocks without hitting a barbecue joint that doesn't rock. And met some folks who were religious but not Bible-thumping nuts. As far as sex criminals go, only ever met the one, and you're reading about it. So that's it. Let's go with something a little bit lighter this time around, shall we? I have a mixed-race child. Originally was told it was mine until she actually gave birth. Since she was mixed, she came out pretty light-skinned. Very light-skinned, actually. But as she got older, her skin got darker and darker. Let the mother stick around for about a year to 2 years. She wasn't from where we were living and didn't have anywhere else to go. Didn't want to kick baby out into the streets. Finally, I had enough of her and kicked her out. But I ended up getting attached to the little girl. Fast forward 2 years and I'm single, lonely, depressed, and missing the little girl. I've had no contact with them. Through the grapevine, I hear my little girl's real dad has nothing to do with her. No contact, no father. From the story I get, the real dad was married and refused her. I set up a meeting with my little girl after 2 years to get a feeling on the situation, and it was like those 2 years never happened. She ran up to me like she just saw me yesterday. I talked to the mother and I said that I'll take care of her. We never went to court. No child support has ever been filed. We don't fight about anything. I tell her if she needs anything as far as money or clothes, whatever, I'll take care of it. She's now 10, I'm married. My wife accepts her with open arms and loves her like I do. She's an awesome kid. Great student, no troubles. I have to teach her a bit of humility because all she's concerned about is being beautiful. But if that's my biggest worry with her, I think that's okay. I wouldn't change anything at all. I will tell you one thing. I live in the South and you would think that a married white couple with 2 normal white kids and an older mixed girl, one would think you get more looks from white folks. Surprisingly, it's the black folks that give us more WTF looks than anything. But like I said, I wouldn't trade her for anything. I love that silly girl. So I'm on the other side of the fence. Basically, I'm dating this girl for about 3 years. Rocky relationship and all that jazz. I break up with her and move back to my hometown for a period. While back, she asked if she can come visit. First mistake, but believe me, intimacy was really golden between us. Anyway, 2 months after the visit, she's pregnant. Not the best news in the world, but I'm from a family of certain values on these matters, so I own up. After spending a week with her and discussing what to do, I go back home and start to prepare stuff. 3 days later, she calls and claims a miscarriage, and we sort of end it and it dies out in the next few weeks. Fast forward 7 months, and I move back to the same city, capital of Norway, Oslo, and continue my career. Suddenly, I see a Facebook post about this girl getting a child, 9 months and 2 days after her visit. It turns out she had been dating another dude for the whole 3 years we had been dating. They even lived together for 2 of the years. She kind of just decided that she felt better with him as the dad. So basically, she convinced him he was the dad. So he announced to the whole world and was just about to go on fatherly leave when I found out. I quietly asked her for a paternity test, and to no surprise, it stated with 99.99% certainty that I'm the father. Crap's unraveling, he's not happy, obviously, and has to tell the world that, nope, just kidding, I'm not a dad. Anyway, 4 years later, it's all good, and we have 50% shared custody, but dang, it was a few funky months in the start. After some questions and stuff, yes, I did spend time at her apartment. She had me over every time the other guy was away and such. She also fake moved into my apartment for 6 months. Not a man, never been in this situation, but I am the child of one of these situations, so I thought I'd chime in. TLDR, Mom stayed with her husband at first, and he is legally my father, but my dad decided he wanted to stay in the picture, so my mom eventually married him, and I have 2 dads. My mom got married when she was 17 and had 3 sons with her first husband. I'm gonna call him Ben. They were together for a long time, I think about 18 years total. Somewhere along the way, she realized she was caught in a loveless marriage, but couldn't really do anything about it. My dad, who I'll call Dave, moved in across the street and the 2 of them started spending time together, and she started an affair with him. They weren't careful enough, and next thing you know, my mom is pregnant with me. She knew from the get-go I wasn't Ben's, and he kind of had an idea too because they weren't intimate that often and the math didn't work out. But I think he went along with it just because he didn't want to think about what she was doing behind his back. My dad initially didn't want to have anything to do with me, so when I was born, they put down her husband's name on my birth certificate as the father and called it a day. Paternity tests were done though, and my mom confirmed what she already knew. Sorry, around here my details get a little fuzzy because my mom still hasn't given me a full and complete story. Dave still definitely didn't want to stick with my mom and I, and it was just agreed that Ben would raise me as his, and they would forget it happened. He was and is a great guy, and an awesome dad. Now the way I've heard it is Dave, despite his convictions, couldn't stay away because he loved my mom so much, and once he laid eyes on me, he was head over heels. Some of my earliest memories are going to visit him in his apartment. At some point between the time I was 2 and the time I was 3, my mom and Ben divorced. I don't remember it and was kept largely out of it, but I understand it was very messy. Because I was legally Ben's daughter, I got the same visitations as my other brothers who were still under 18. My mom and Dave married when I was 4, and Dave was never happy about these visits, but I was because I loved Ben so much. Ben was always daddy, Dave was dad. It was understood, and I never confused the two or made reference to one being my parent in front of the other. Even as a 4- and 5-year-old, I knew the sensitive nature of the situation. It was never confusing either, because they really are 2 very different people who I think provided me with a great balance of paternal figures in my life. Like I said, Ben was always daddy, sweet, endearing with the heart of gold who just wanted his little girl to be happy and would spoil her rotten to see her smile and make stupid jokes to get a giggle out of her. Dave was dad, still kind and loved me to death, but more of the disciplinarian who I knew not to mess with. My mom's not married to either of them now, another long-winded story entirely, but I consider both of them to be my father and I consider both of them to have done the best job they could have, and I think I turned out alright. My boyfriend's daughter is not his. He broke his hand on a door when he found out, but he never once denied her. He is on her birth certificate, has his last name, the whole 9 yards. She is his baby girl and he is her daddy. End of story. His ex-wife still likes to hold it above his head though. If you don't do XYZ, I'm getting a DNA test on baby and you'll never see her again. Burns me up. Throwaway account for reasons. I was 16 and in high school when I was dating this girl who was my first love. We will call her Kay. Kay and I were intimate roughly 3 months before homecoming. We had only been dating for a few weeks prior to that. Being a hormonal teenager was a nice mix with a girl that was willing to put out. Things go by as they usually do. We still see each other and screw like rabbits. However, Kay was also hanging out with this other guy named Derek every time she wasn't around me. My best friend Matt starts telling me that he's seeing them hold hands and making up at the art room, etc. Sure as heck, I catch them in the middle of a hot and heavy session, but being the dumb kid that I was, I forgave her. A few days later, she tells me she hasn't had her period in the last 2 months. Eventually, we try to keep things on the down low until the day of homecoming, and by the time we're taking pictures, with my whole family around, of course, she announces that she's pregnant. So begins a spiral of madness for the next 7 months. After one last night of fun at our homecoming dance, we start discussing what we need to do in order to prepare for the baby. I start applying for jobs pretty much taking in the fact that my life is in order. No more fun for me now. We made preparations to get an apartment to provide for the kid. My folks are angry at me, not talking to me until they had to. The rumors around the school are crazy. What makes it worse is that most of them were accusing me of forcing myself onto Kay. Even my friends believed it. The rumor went out that I had forced myself on her with no protection and had my way with her. It got so out of hand that counselors would call me in daily to make sure that I was of sound mind. Being accused for being a sex criminal was insane for being 16, and I wouldn't ever wish that on anyone. It all blew up when I caught Kay sexting my best friend, Matt. That's when I started thinking that something was up. I know, I was a freaking idiot. About 2 weeks after, she breaks up with me and starts dating Matt. She starts calling me and texting me, calling me a sex criminal and a piece of crap lowlife. Even though she said these things, she still loved me and wanted to support our kid. I really start having a mental breakdown, knowing that I can't trust anyone. Heck, even thought about eating a bullet just to end it all. I had no one. My folks moved to a different school to hope that I could start fresh, but despite this, the torment goes on until her delivery date. My whole family is there and the hospital and my stomach is in knots. I can't breathe. This was the night that my adult life would begin. Hours pass and she finally goes through her contractions and the baby is born. The baby comes out to be black. I wish I was joking, and I know how insane this all sounds. The worst part is that my best friend Matt was black. The sheer horror on Kay's face is something that I will never forget and something that I will never forgive. Immediately, I go for a DNA test, and a few weeks later, it comes back that it's not mine. My friend Matt was screwing my girlfriend behind my back the entire time. My whole high school and teenage years were ruined because these people couldn't tell the truth. Back in college, I was seeing a girl for a while. Kinda serious, more so for her than me apparently. She winds up pregnant. I was young, didn't really know what to do, but knew if it was mine, I would do the right thing and be the father. Major caveat, I have a physical condition that makes it highly unlikely that I can actually get anyone knocked up, and she knew this. Long story and possible identifying info, so I'm leaving the details out. Anyway, she swears up and down through the whole pregnancy that it could only be mine, so I went along with it. I was out of town the weekend the kiddo was born. She apparently tried to reach me, but this was long before cell phones, and I had gone home to a different city with a college friend to party, and in all likelihood avoided home during that time frame, since I was reasonably sure it wasn't mine. Kiddo was born, I went to see them a few times over the next few weeks, and then shortly after that, they get called by my folks that she had stopped by their house and introduced it to them as their new grandson. They were ecstatic and happy for me, and all the fun stuff they anticipated about being new grandparents. I had to basically put the brakes on real hard at that point and tell them I was pretty sure that it was not my kid. I pretty much knew after I saw it. One look at it, and there was just no connection at all. It was a baby, but I saw nothing there that I recognized as mine in any way, shape, or form. Due to the fact that she was already on the dole, the state mandated a paternity test. I figured I just might as well get it over with and showed up for the appointment when they told me to. Once the results came back, there was a less than 1% chance it was mine. I turned around, never looked back. Only saw her twice since then, and it's been 20 plus years now, but both times she was almost in tears trying to apologize for doing that to me back then. I heard through the grapevine who ended up being the actual father, and he already had a few bastards running around, so he was no help to them at all. Not only that, but his poor health and drug issues put him in an early grave, so that poor kid had no father figure growing up. Thankfully, I kept a level head through the whole ordeal, and even got a letter of commendation from the county prosecutor's office saying that they wished even half the potential fathers were half as cooperative as I had been. TLDR, if you're gonna try and pin a kid on someone, make sure it's theirs if there's going to be a mandatory DNA test. Didn't make it that far, but had a little fling with a girl who I was honest and up in front with. It was a fling, and it wasn't gonna be serious. She agreed to it. So one time we were getting it on. Protection broke. I told her and she didn't seem to worry. Mind you, this was way before climax when I noticed. Also, I made sure there was no pre-emission. I had that when I put the new one on. Made sure that everything was good afterwards. Fast forward a couple weeks and she messages me saying she's preggo. I admit my heart jumped a little, but I called her calm as a British bloke drinking tea. She was so surprised that she asked why I wasn't freaking out and getting angry or panicking. Truth is, I knew that the likelihood of her being pregnant was very slim, and either way, I would man up no matter what. I asked her all the details. Was I the only one? Have you been drinking since the last time? And all that good stuff. I told her I wasn't ready for that, but the ultimate decision was hers to make. She started saying how she would never do such a thing, and I still stayed calm, told her we would talk in the morning. I was just meeting up with my boys to go party. She was shocked even more that I was still so calm and started asking where I was going because she was going out with her friends too. I didn't tell her. After that, I knew for sure she was trying to push my buttons. So the next day I spoke to her, she tells me she has to think about it. I said, take your time. Eventually, a few days later, she said she's not going to keep it and that she booked an appointment with her doctor who was in another city and over an hour away. She doesn't drive, and so I offered to give her a ride. She declined and said a friend would give her one. She said all she could to convince me that I don't need to go with her, so I backed off. I know where she worked, and she worked all day the day she was supposed to go, but she messaged me saying that she went and then she couldn't walk properly after. I played along and never spoke to her again. Mad props to this guy for having an iron will. I was dating a girl for 3 years who I had trusted. I was 18 at the time. She got pregnant. I was relatively safe, but everybody has slip-ups. I took my lumps and agreed to fatherhood and did the best I could. During the entirety of the pregnancy, she was pretty absent. She wouldn't talk to me much, sometimes for months at a time. I thought this was odd. It frustrated me beyond belief. Anyway, so later on a friend of hers started to work with me. He started to hook up with one of my coworkers. She told me he knew my GF and I was thinking, oh cool, interesting. Then she told me he banged my GF within the last year. I was mad. I called her up and talked with her. Apparently they did screw, when we were on some break. This was entirely made up. The timing didn't match up with the pregnancy though, so I continued on my way to fatherhood with this soon-to-be mother that was all over the place. Eventually, she gave birth to a little girl. I wasn't there at the birth because I wasn't told it was happening. A couple of months down the road of trying to contact her, she let me see my girl. It was great. We started talking again and acting like parents. Well, just to make sure that this new baby girl was mine, I went ahead and had a paternity test. She was a 1% match, and therefore was not my daughter. I was appalled. I went to her place and asked her what this was about. She swore up and down it had to be mine. DNA is DNA. She wasn't my little girl after all. I left her, on her knees crying for me to come back to her apartment. I got a text later that day. She told me she remembered. She got blackout drunk and screwed this guy at a party. She claimed he basically forced himself upon her. I don't believe this at all. So I went through 9 months of a pregnancy and 3 months of actual fatherhood before I found out. Now I don't talk to her at all. I hear rumors occasionally about her, but I am so glad she is no longer in my life. TLDR, screw that woman. Psychologists, therapists, counselors, etc. What are some things people tend to think are normal but should really be checked out? Disclaimer: this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please see a licensed professional for health advice and counseling. Hi, I'm a kid who fell through the cracks. Got diagnosed with dyscalculia when I was a sophomore in high school. Throughout the years, my parents would tell counselors, psychologists, etc. that something wasn't right, and it was more than me being bad at math. It took a really cool teacher I had pushing and advocating for me to get an official diagnosis before anyone did anything. I understand fully that sometimes parents can be a pain, but please, 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 if a kid is 15 or 16 years old and is stuck at a 5th grade math level, look into it. People normalize abusive behaviors by loved ones all the time. Being able to identify your own personal boundaries and then enforce them with others for your own well-being is, unfortunately, not innate. Therapist here. If you grew up with or currently are part of a family where the whole family has to work to keep one or more members of the family in a good mood or appeased, that's not healthy. People are in charge of their own feelings. It is not your job to appease others so that they can emotionally regulate themselves. Disassociating with friends. Current friend of mine is having real struggles emotionally and mentally. We're still talking, but he's been distancing himself from other people. We reach breakthroughs every now and again, but it's been difficult. Psychotherapist here. Some things I see regularly that could have been caught earlier before they became a problem: unhealthy coping mechanisms. For example, drinking to, quote, relax frequently or smoking a lot. Even something like promiscuity can be a red flag that a person is trying to avoid dealing with something stressful by distracting themselves. Self-harm. Hitting yourself, banging your head on things, burning yourself on purpose, cutting yourself, etc. All of those things indicate that it's time to talk with a professional. Quote-unquote normal child-teen behaviors that are not actually normal, like running away or getting into fights. Not communicating. When this happens, something is usually wrong. Not always, as some folks are quieter than others. But if a child, teen, or adult rarely speaks, or if they're silent in the presence of their parent or significant other, it's time to get them to see a professional alone to have their safety assessed. I've seen individuals who are literally shut down due to having been profoundly abused by the people they live with, and one of the main signs of that is silence. I've also seen people in perfectly good homes who cannot communicate due to extreme anxiety, and without professional help, it's hard for them to overcome this. Mood swings. When a person's moods change from one extreme to another fairly often or regularly, that is another concerning symptom. Sometimes they are considered eccentric or hormonal, but that sort of thing can be a sign of many problems from bipolar disorder to post-traumatic stress disorder. Self-sabotaging behavior can ruin your life quickly. If you have an event in your life that has affected you negatively and you seem to find yourself exhibiting irrational or incongruent behaviors, see a counselor. You don't have to have any certain pathology to seek mental wellness counseling. Thinking that 5 hours of sleep per night is okay. Rapid weight gain or loss with no obvious medical cause. Relationship problems. Don't get me freaking started. To clarify, what I really mean is that poor sleep is usually a symptom of something more serious like depression or anxiety. Our bodies are often not as well as hiding things as our minds are. I'm curious how much procrastinating and/or lack of motivation to do stuff is normal and how much isn't. From what my therapist told me, if you would simply rather be doing other stuff, that's perfectly normal. But if you absolutely could not bring yourself to do homework, there's something wrong. I used to have severe anxiety attacks about homework to the point where when I needed to do it, I'd either be completely drained and go to sleep, regardless of time of day, or have a huge breakdown. Executive dysfunction, the inability to do things that you know you need to do, is a major symptom of ADHD. Take a look into other symptoms and see if that might fit. See a doctor if your life is affected. I'm going to word this incorrectly, so bear with me if I say something inaccurate, but I have a fun fact for my therapist. The frontal lobe is the part of the brain that deals with anxiety. It also deals with studying, but I'm not sure if it's the ability to force yourself to focus or if it's something else. Either way, the frontal lobe is important. It turns out that it's bad for your brain to be in a constant state of anxiety. So if you had a crappy childhood, like me, you're screwed because, as my therapist put it, the constant stress wrecks your frontal lobe. Which explains why it's almost impossible for me to study unless I'm cramming for an exam in a couple hours or starting to write a paper an hour before it's due. I can't activate the part of my brain necessary to focus on my task if I'm not in a state of panic. I don't know anything about how it ties into things like the fact that I keep my clothes strewn around until 10 minutes before a guest shows up, but I suspect it might be a similar thing. So I'd say that my major lack of motivation isn't normal, and it makes me wonder how much better I'd be in my classes if I'd had a normal childhood. There have been a lot of my patients who have been pretty surprised when I've told them, hey, that's anxiety or depression, when they just thought their behaviors were typical for everyone. Not being able to maintain friendships, constantly being nervous about the safety of your child to the point where you hate being alone with your child without your partner, not being able to motivate yourself to do things, especially things you once enjoyed, feeling excessively tired all the time, not being able to calm down and just thinking the same thoughts over and over without feeling worried. Other things we can help with. Having a hard time trusting others, trying to recover a relationship from infidelity, not knowing why your kid is misbehaving so much and needing guidance, helping to improve communication within your relationships. If you experience these things and more, therapists can help. Let us help you. Edited to add, I've noticed costs coming up in a lot of these replies. I hate that cost is such a barrier for people. Sometimes colleges offer free or discounted therapy from their students. When you're training to be a therapist, you spend at least 1 year working as a therapist while meeting with the supervisor each week to consult on your cases and get guidance on moving forward. My college unfortunately didn't offer discounted sessions, but I know many do. It might be worth checking out. Some systems also have charity care options for people with low incomes. That can be worth pursuing as well. To find a therapist, if you're in the US, you can call your insurance company and get a list of places that take your insurance. That's a good place to start. A good rule of thumb as to whether a behavior or symptom should be checked out is the same we use to determine a diagnosable disorder, if it causes impairment in one or more areas of life. The range of what's normal is huge, but if something keeps you from going to school or work, keeps you from maintaining basic hygiene, from maintaining your friendships, familiar relationships, or romantic relationships, it's causing impairment and you should seek help. Number 1. This is not an exhaustive criteria for diagnosable mental illness. There are many criteria that we consider in diagnosing, but the one criterion that is present for all is that it must cause impairment. Number 2, enjoyment is also an important aspect of functioning. If you are getting by in your life but are miserable, get help. You don't have to live like that. Number 3, serial killers and sociopaths represent a very small percentage of the population and rarely seek help willingly. This was not directed at them. Number 4, the areas of functioning I listed are general examples pulled from the Western culture where I live and was trained. Different cultures have different values and the norms of your culture should be taken into account. Number 5, if you are unbothered by your level of functioning in these areas relative to cultural expectations, good for you. Most people considering this advice likely have a sense that something is not where they want it to be in their life and are looking for confirmation that it's bad enough to seek help. If you're not concerned, my advice is not directed at you. Number 6, no one is saying that being content with having no interpersonal connections is inherently pathological. What if I'm very high functioning? Like, I make it to work every day and have a social life and I'm able to clean up after myself, but I have no purpose. I'm not actually interested in things. I just exist to pay my bills and smile for the audience. It's like I'm just staring at life's clock waiting for my time to be up. I feel like the world is ending, but it's not scary. I'm frustrated it's taking so long. I'm just tired of existing. Is this fine as long as I show up to work and do my laundry? Okay, wow. Y'all have told me to have kids, do drugs, see a therapist, go for a walk, make a friend, to stop being an attention grabber. This is great. Everybody has a freaking solution as usual. But so many of you feel this way, so I'm glad to know it's not just me. I attempted to end my life about 6 years ago. Back then, I could barely get out of bed or feed myself. I don't feel that way anymore, so I guess I thought maybe I still wasn't depressed, that I was finally over it. I took a big step a few days ago and saw a therapist, and I have another appointment scheduled. I didn't think this post would turn into what it is. It was a late night post where my thoughts burrowed out of my skull in a fit of abject despondency. Thanks for the kind words and the unkind words. I just hope you all have gotten something out of this. The attitudes of their parents. No, really. There are a lot of bad things that current parents do that are just seen as normal when they're not, and they have long-lasting psychological effects from emotional damage. Inability to regulate your emotions. Also, negative self-talk. We talk to ourselves way worse than any person could. Let me expand on this if you don't mind. Generally, your emotions should be like a calm river. No needless waves, no great sadness, anxiety, angry outburst, misplaced fear, but also no great ecstasy. All these feelings have their place and will be experienced at one point or another, but your default state should be calm, like an EKG with an occasional spike. Similarly, when a negative spike happens, one should be able to manage it internally, ideally without the use of external substances, and in an adequate time, move past it. I think that's what we should all aim for, myself definitely included. Shadow people. One question we asked was if they ever saw, heard, or smelled anything others didn't. This came up more often than you might think. I drive trains, which is a career fraught with extensive sleep deprivation and random sleeping times. The company I work for now is really good about rest days each week, but I used to work for another company where I averaged 5 sleep cycles for every 7 days. Also, very stressful work environment between constantly having the company try to trick you into getting fired, or even just how easy it is to screw up and kill a whole town of people. So, shadow people is a common occurrence that we just get used to. They usually appear on the edge of your vision, right in front of you. Some guys will call them track people. They're standing or walking down the track just past your headlights. Just knowing about it makes it easier to just ignore your mind and trust your instincts. But being off duty and awake for 36 to 72 hours at a time gets weird. I start to hear a low murmur, like static or something mechanical, or maybe a radio that is just barely out of tune in the next room, just loud enough to know you're hearing something. And things moving around in your periphery, like things that are really there, disappear and come back randomly. The need for some parents to speak with their children about adult problems. No, your young child does not need to be aware that you are struggling financially or that daddy slept with the lady next door. The parents that tell their children that they are going to go and speed my car into a tree purposely, off myself while you were at school, or slit my wrist when I showered tonight. And parents that they feel they need their children fixed as it's the child and not the family unit as a whole that needs support and or assistance. Just a few recent ones I've heard. In regards to financial comments, taken from a previous comment of mine as I've been getting asked to answer this, I'm talking more on the extreme side and towards children that have been extremely hurt and money talk was used as a tool to make the child feel at fault and guilt to some degree. I'm currently working with a child now that is triggered whenever he hears talk about finances and feels it's his fault they will eventually become homeless. They won't, but this is what he's told. If only he didn't eat so much, if only he didn't have so many school fees. Not to mention the arguing between carers over finances. This must be his fault too though, they're yelling and shouting because of this. I've seen a lot of people dismiss their depression and other mental illnesses because it's not that bad, or other people have it worse, or I can and should be able to handle it on my own. You shouldn't have to suffer through mental illness, even if you technically can. You deserve to be happy, and therapists and psychiatrists are there to help you learn how to help yourself. It's not a weakness to find someone who can assist you in figuring out coping skills or prescribe you medications to help fine-tune your brain's neurotransmitters. This post right here, this is what I've been saying. Some people just say, oh, I'll cope, or it's fine, when it's not. It's like they're not allowed to have a mental illness, when in reality they're in survival mode and they can't register healthy emotions or mechanisms. It's like a post I read out before. If you're just existing, living day to day detached from everything and everyone, being constantly tired, or having persistent thoughts of death, that's not normal. And I get it. The American mental health care system sucks. It's not easy to get help, most of the time because it's financially unviable for them. But a lot of times, the people who need it the most won't ask for it. It's because they don't feel the need to. They don't want to bother anyone, or they think it's too difficult, or they have anxiety about making appointments. I don't mean to be pushy or ranty, but I sincerely hope anyone who needs a therapist watching this video gets the help they deserve, because people aren't all awful, especially not you. From the patient side, it took having a massive anxiety attack at my doctor's office to find out that no, massive anxiety attacks in front of strangers isn't common or normal. Research psychologist checking in, if your toddler is doing socially unusual behaviors such as not responding to name, not responding to a social smile, not pointing using gestures, using your hands and arms as if they were a tool or extension of the body, engaging in repetitive behaviors, not responding to your use of gaze to direct their attention to distal objects. Check with a pediatrician about getting assessed for autism spectrum disorder. Perfectionism. While a spectrum and everyone wants to do good work, an obsession with perfection is not something to be proud of and definitely not healthy. Healthy work ethic is doing your best and then letting go, as in recognizing no matter how much effort you put in, the result is, to some extent, out of your control. And that's okay. The intent and effort counts more than the end result. If you get obsessed with the end result only, you will hurt yourself because you never have full control over your end result, but you do have full control over the intensity and dedication you will put in, even if that doesn't translate well. It is a fact of life sometimes things don't work out. So people who never, and I mean never, have anything less than flawless work all the time are paying for it somehow. Burnout or mental stress or overtime or medications and drugs to keep going, or etc. It is pathological to want or to think you can realistically have such control that your work is flawless all the time. I'd like to point out that there are tons of things that are normal but are not healthy or ideal. Normal is just what the statistical majority are doing, not what would be best for them. I think the main question should be, what impact is blank having on my life and relationships, rather than wondering how it compares to the average person's experience or behaviors. Excellent point. One of the fundamental points of any successful therapy is aiding the patient in distinguishing whether a behavior is self-helping and or other society helping, or it is self-harming and or other society harming. Many harmful and even malicious thinking and behavior patterns are common, but are definitely unhealthy. Conversely, many greatly healthy and self-helping ways of thinking and behavior may be even actively discouraged by some people in society. See part about unhealthy things being common. So ultimately, anyone seeking a happy and successful life must learn to judge things from a functional perspective, and ultimately throw the loads of negativity and bullcrap that a good chunk of society will often try too hard to instill into your thinking out of the window. If you can learn how to do that on your own, great, good for you. But if you have trouble, by all means reach out. Never let yourself remain stuck. New nurse here. Did my rotation for mental health, and one patient in particular took quite an interest in me. He was very polite and very kind. He was chatting up a storm, answered everyone's questions, and repeatedly asked my name. Later, we got to look at patients' files and I got his. He had a psychotic break and started hearing God. She told him her name was Courtney and that she had chosen him and he was to find her and marry her. Guess what my first name is? Courtney. They ended up moving me to another part of the hospital after that because he was quite interested. Can confirm, I am definitely not God. Way too much responsibility. Coping with stress in your relationships by walking away from conversations, saying you've had enough, or going silent. Coping with feelings of insecurity and anxiety by lashing out at your partner. Example, asking a bunch of questions about one of their acquaintances instead of saying, I feel insecure for these reasons, please talk through it with me. Been a couples therapist for 10 years, now clinical director of a private practice. So many more, but those are two of the most prevalent in couples work. Tech here, so bottom of the totem pole, but I'll offer my opinion. Normal is not the right qualifier in my opinion. Psychology isn't like physiology, where you can go in and they can run exploratory tests on you to find out you're sick in a way that hasn't manifested symptoms yet. That's why your doctor will screen you for certain common or devastating disorders. The way I learned about mental illness was the 4 Ds: dysfunction, deviation, distress, and danger. Dysfunction means it gets in the way of you doing your job, school, or whatever. Deviation means it's not something everyone is going through. Distress means you're not okay with it. Danger is self-explanatory. You come in with some or all of the 4 Ds, and we form a treatment based on a set of symptoms that you most closely match. Then we treat the symptoms. The point of all this is to say, mental illness exists on a spectrum where one end may be so subtle that it only informs a person's personality, whereas the other end is completely debilitating and can get a person killed. You may know someone with features of an illness. In fact, I'd be surprised if you didn't. But if they don't want or need treatment, then they shouldn't be diagnosed. The best example is autism. Someone high on the functionality side of autism will do quite well in life. In fact, it is actually quite fair to discuss if autistic people live better lives than their counterparts. The answer would be entirely based on what you value in a quote-unquote good life. The next group of people are objectively suffering from their condition. They may have a chemical imbalance in their brain that causes them to be more anxious or sad than their counterparts. However, if it doesn't have enough impact on that individual, then they may go their entire lives without really needing to be checked out. To answer your question, if someone feels like their life would benefit from the field of psychology, then they need to get checked out. The hurdle that professionals face is educating people on what kinds of things psychology can help with. That is just to say that many different extremes of certain traits can be a symptom. However, you do have to make sure it is abnormal for that person. Not everyone who doesn't like people is clinically isolative. Not everyone who has lots of intimacy with multiple partners is hypersexual, and not everyone who doesn't brush their teeth is depressed. It takes no time at all to learn the different symptoms of different disorders. The rest of the time at school will be spent finding how to tell if those traits are a symptom or just who that person is, and of course what to do about it. Often the question of why is important in mental illness. Not participating in something you used to love may be anhedonia, or you may have just lost interest. Your medical doctor should never have to ask you why you have swollen lymph nodes. Your therapist should absolutely ask why you want to get a divorce. He cheated on me is not a symptom, but he's not my husband anymore, he is an imposter that looks like my husband, but he is an Al-Qaeda spy sent to kill me is, most likely. Emotional regulation. I see typical kids that just can't handle anything. It's terrifying. They are going to have a very difficult journey ahead unless they seek help. Dismissing your own feelings, your own thoughts, and your own internal voice saying something isn't right because others around the world have it worse. Devaluing your thoughts and emotions is a quick path down to making them louder and more painful. Rage and anger outbursts. I'm shocked by how much bad behavior during an adult tantrum is written off with little or no concern. Oh, that's just how he gets when he gets mad. He'll calm down. No, adults should be able to regulate their anger and handle it appropriately. Everyone gets angry. That is totally normal. But we shouldn't find ourselves escalating so easily and responding in ways we later regret. Trauma reactions. They are very normal for the situation but are not healthy or easy to deal with without help. Our bodies and brains hoard survival responses, so I see a lot of people struggling with unhealthy coping skills or habits that at one point kept them safe and helped them survive. This can range from large mood swings, emotional or physical disassociation, difficulty connecting with one's physical or emotional being, and difficulty identifying triggers. I get a lot of childhood abuse survivors who have had issues in therapy before due to this. If your therapist goes in assuming you are able to connect with and name feelings, identify what is weighing on you, etc., they won't be very helpful. Also, my normal therapy PSA is, whenever possible, please don't wait. There is no such thing as an issue too small for therapy, but waiting can cause something to morph into a way bigger issue. I know for a variety of reasons that isn't always feasible, but if you can, please do.
When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.